My husband's mistress slapped me across the face in open court while I was 8 months pregnant, and my husband just stood there and laughed. But his amusement died instantly when the judge opened a sealed folder, stared directly into his eyes, and uttered 2 words that didn't just end our marriage, they sent him to federal prison, and revealed a $2.8 million betrayal so twisted that even the mistress realized she had been completely destroyed. The sound of her palm cracking against my cheek bounced off the cold marble walls of the Charleston County Courthouse like a gunshot. My lips split instantly against my teeth. I tasted the sharp, hot tang of copper before I even registered the physical sting of the impact. My hand moved on pure, primal instinct, crossing over my swollen stomach to shield my unborn daughter before it ever went to my face. I was 31 years old, exactly 33 weeks pregnant, and I was sitting completely alone at the defense table. My husband, Julian Vance, looked at Chloe Sutton's hand, the exact same hand that had just struck his pregnant wife, in front of a sworn bailiff, a wide-eyed stenographer, and Judge Thomas Sterling himself, and he laughed. It wasn't a loud, boisterous sound. It was a quiet, private, deeply intimate chuckle, the exact kind of laugh 2 people share when they think absolutely no one else in the room is smart enough to understand the joke. I had heard that specific laugh before. I had heard it across candlelit dinner tables, in sterile hospital waiting rooms, and once, most memorably, at my own mother's funeral when he thought my eyes were closed in prayer. But this time, it was entirely different. This time, the laugh wasn't aimed past me. It was aimed directly at me, weaponized in front of witnesses, and in that exact fraction of a second, something deep inside my chest went very still, very quiet, and completely ice cold. That laugh was the exact moment I permanently stopped being afraid of the man I had married. My attorney, Arthur Pendleton, wasn't in the room yet. His heavy leather chair sat completely empty beside me, and I had never in my entire privileged, sheltered life felt so violently exposed. Julian's 3 high-priced defense attorneys flanked him like an impenetrable wall of expensive gray wool. Chloe stood just behind his right shoulder, her manicured hands still raised slightly, hovering in the tense air like she was actively deciding whether she wanted to strike me a second time. The bailiff had already unclipped his radio and started moving swiftly toward us, his heavy boots echoing on the floor. I sat there in my navy maternity dress, a drop of blood welling on my bottom lip, feeling my daughter kicking frantically against my lower ribs in response to my spiking adrenaline. And I thought, with an absolute, terrifying clarity, this is the day everything changes forever. I didn't know yet just how right I was. But to understand the absolute insanity of that morning, I need to back up 6 years, to be exact. Back to a humid spring night in Charleston, South Carolina, when I was 27 years old. Back when I believed, with the total, unshakable, arrogant confidence of youth, that I completely understood the man I was agreeing to marry. My name is Claire Montgomery. I grew up in a sprawling, historic house my grandfather painstakingly restored with his own hands, and then, decades later, maintained with the massive profits of Montgomery Estate Holdings, the elite commercial real estate and investment firm he founded in 1976. By the time I was born, the Montgomery firm managed high-end commercial properties across 4 different states. It had a towering reputation in Charleston for being run with an old-fashioned, ruthless kind of integrity that made massive regional banks trust it implicitly and local competitors resent it bitterly. My mother, Evelyn Montgomery, took over as CEO when I was 20. She was sharp, terrifyingly exacting, and the only person on earth who ever made me feel like carrying the Montgomery name was a heavy job I had to actively earn every single day, rather than a golden birthright I could comfortably coast on. I met Julian at a black-tied charity gala for the Charleston Children's Hospital the spring I turned 26. He was 42 years old, already a formidable, established name in local business circles. He was the CEO of a massive logistics and shipping company called Apex Logistics that his father had built and he had aggressively expanded. Julian was polished in a way that felt, at the time, like genuine confidence rather than a carefully rehearsed performance. He didn't use cheap pickup lines. He asked me an intelligent question about the event seating chart before he ever asked me my name. He remembered, 3 entire weeks later, that I had casually mentioned my late grandmother's vintage sapphire earrings during a brief conversation by the bar. For my 27th birthday, he had a custom matching sapphire bracelet meticulously crafted for me. I thought that was the height of romance. I understand now, with the bitter clarity of hindsight, that it was purely reconnaissance. We married the following spring. I was 27, he was 43. My mother liked him well enough at first, though she once told me over black coffee on our back patio that she could never seem to get a straight, definitive answer out of him about anything that actually mattered. I rolled my eyes and told her she was being paranoid. I want to be brutally honest about that specific memory because it matters deeply later on. I entirely dismissed my mother's razor-sharp instincts. I was in love. And love made me stupid in a very specific, very common, very dangerous way. About 5 months into our marriage, Julian suggested so gently, over a beautiful candlelit dinner he had cooked himself, that I stepped back from my active role at Montgomery Estate Holdings. Not forever, darling, he had murmured, pouring me another glass of expensive wine. Just while we settle into married life. You've been working yourself to the bone. He mentioned he had a close friend, a brilliant independent financial manager named Simon Rostova, who could easily help simplify and consolidate my personal finances so I wouldn't have to stress over quarterly spreadsheets while I figured out what my new, relaxed life as a wife looked like. I didn't know then that Simon Rostova had already been quietly sitting on Julian's private corporate payroll for 14 months before I ever even heard the man's name. I wouldn't find that out until years later, buried deep in a heavily redacted legal discovery document with a bright yellow highlighted line that would make my hands shake uncontrollably. But at the time, I listened. I stepped back. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of comfortable lies. 18 months into our marriage, my mother died. It was a massive, sudden brain aneurysm. On a rainy Tuesday morning in late October, right in the middle of a high-stakes board meeting, she collapsed. She was 61 years old. I was 29. I do not have the adequate vocabulary to describe what that specific, suffocating kind of grief does to a human brain, so I won't try to dress it up with pretty metaphors. It entirely hollowed me out. It scooped out my insides and left a walking shell. For 6 solid months, I couldn't hold a coherent, logical thought for longer than it took to boil a pot of water. Julian handled absolutely everything. He managed the complex funeral arrangements. He liaised with the aggressive estate attorneys. He tackled the endless, suffocating mountains of paperwork that always follows a sudden death like a second, quieter tragedy. He would gently set thick stacks of documents in front of me at our kitchen table, hand me my favorite pen, and say in his soothing, even baritone, "Just sign here, Clara. Don't stress your pretty head. I've already reviewed it all with the lawyers." And I did. I signed whatever he put in front of me. I thought it was standard probate paperwork. I thought it was tax forms. It wasn't. There was one chilling moment back then that I completely failed to understand until it was far too late. About 4 months after we buried my mother, I was walking down the hallway and overheard Julian on his cell phone inside his locked study. His voice was pitched incredibly low, a harsh whisper. I heard him say the exact words, "Don't worry about it, Simon. The paperwork is already completely clean on our end." He suddenly noticed my shadow in the doorway and ended the call abruptly, his face flushing. He immediately smoothed his features and told me it was just a routine, boring compliance check for Apex Logistics. I remember standing there in my bare feet, thinking it was slightly strange that he had sounded so profoundly relieved to see me standing there, rather than annoyed at the interruption the way he usually was when working. I didn't press him. I didn't ask a single follow-up question. I regret that specific moment of silence more than almost anything else in my entire life, because that exact sentence "times clean on our end" times would come back to haunt me nearly 2 years later, word for terrifying word, in a vastly different, utterly devastating context. The months immediately following my mother's unexpected death are still, to this day, the absolute blurriest stretch of my adult existence. I only remember fractured shards of time. I remember Julian aggressively handling the funeral home negotiations, picking out an absurdly expensive mahogany casket while I sat shivering in the passenger seat of his car because I physically could not force my legs to walk through the glass doors. I remember him fielding endless phone calls from the Montgomery Estate Holdings Board of Directors, sternly telling them on my behalf that I needed extreme privacy and space, and that he would personally relay any urgent executive decisions to me. I remember feeling so intensely, deeply grateful for that. The desperate, pathetic way you feel grateful for anyone who steps in and carries a crushing weight you are too weak to lift yourself. It took me years of therapy to finally understand that the weight Julian was carrying wasn't a burden he was sparing me from. It was financial and legal leverage he was quietly, methodically gathering while I was far too broken and medicated by grief to notice anyone gathering anything. There was a particular Tuesday, roughly 8 weeks after the funeral, that I have replayed in my mind more times than I can count. I came home exhausted from an intensive grief counseling session to find my mother's longtime, fiercely loyal corporate attorney, Brenda Carmichael, standing in the middle of our circular driveway. Her luxury sedan's door was wide open, and she was visibly furious, mid-screaming match with Julian right on our manicured front lawn. The exact second I stepped out of my own vehicle, both of them snapped their mouths shut. Brenda looked at me for a long, agonizing second. Her eyes were red. She looked like she desperately wanted to scream something at me, but then she visibly swallowed it down, shook her head in disgust, got back into her car, and sped off without ever coming inside the house. When I asked Julian what on earth that insane display was about, he sighed heavily, rubbed his temples like a man burdened by the incompetence of others, and told me Brenda was having a severe emotional breakdown accepting that the firm's legal structure was changing under new management. He told me that grief made some people terribly territorial and difficult, and that he hated to see it negatively affect someone who had clearly loved my mother so much. I remember feeling genuinely sorry for Brenda in that moment. I actually pitied her, as if she were the one behaving irrationally. I didn't call her, not that week, not that month, not that entire year. I let my husband smooth, Perfectly delivered explanation permanently close a door that I now fully understand had been the absolute last honest door available to me. For the next 2.5 years, our marriage maintained a glossy, surface-level calm. Julian traveled constantly for Apex Logistics, sometimes vanishing for 12 to 14 days a month to places like Chicago, Miami, and Santa Barbara. I threw myself into a much slower, quieter kind of life. I volunteered 3 days a week at the Children's Hospital where we had first met, and I stayed loosely, passively involved with Montgomery Holdings through quarterly financial reports that I now understand were entirely fabricated and curated specifically for my eyes. 14 months ago, I finally got pregnant. Julian seemed absolutely ecstatic. He cried tears of joy. I believed those tears, too. The great unraveling of my entire reality didn't happen all at once. It started incredibly small, the way these massive, life-destroying things always do. 3 months ago, when I was roughly 5 months pregnant, I decided to log into an old web portal to update a simple beneficiary designation on one of my late mother's legacy investment accounts, the specific account she had always intended to become her first grandchild's college fund. The firm's automated system locked me out. When I called the Elite Client Services line, a very polite, very confused representative informed me that I was no longer listed as an authorized contact on my own family's accounts. My blood ran cold. I asked, my voice shaking, exactly who was listed as the authorized contact. The representative paused, typing loudly. I have 2 names on file, ma'am, Julian Vance, and a Miss Chloe Sutton. I didn't recognize the second name. I sat in my sweltering car in the parking lot of a local grocery store for 45 minutes, staring blankly at the steering wheel, before I could command my hands to turn the key and drive home. That night, completely consumed by a sickening, gnawing paranoia, I waited until Julian was asleep. I crept into his home office, looking for absolutely anything that might explain the name Chloe Sutton. I dug through a heavy leather garment bag he had carelessly left shoved in the back of his closet from a business trip to Santa Barbara 2 months prior. Deep inside a zippered, hidden pocket, I found 2 pieces of paper that would detonate my life. The first was a luxury hotel folio. It listed the room occupants as Julian Vance and Chloe Sutton. The second was a crumpled, faded receipt from a high-end boutique jewelry store I didn't recognize. It was dated the exact same week as the hotel stay. The total amount made my pregnant stomach drop violently. $3,500. It was for a diamond pendant. A gift I had most certainly never received. I didn't scream. I didn't wake him up. Instead, I quietly took photos of everything with my phone, put the papers exactly back where I found them, and locked myself in the guest bathroom. I called the only person on this earth I still trusted enough to think logically with. My old college roommate, Maya Lynn, who had spent the last 8 years working as a senior paralegal for a cutthroat family law firm in Atlanta. I read her the hotel folio. I read her the jewelry receipt. Maya was dead silent for almost a full minute. And then, in a voice completely stripped of emotion, she said the words that dictated the next 14 months of my life. Clara, listen to me very carefully. Document everything. Do not confront him. Do not change your behavior. Do not say a single, solitary word. Get a shark of a lawyer before the sun comes up. I hired Arthur Pendleton the very next morning. Arthur was a legendary, terrifyingly competent litigator in Charleston. I learned a week later that Julian's corporate legal team had actually already tried to reach out to Arthur's firm 3 days prior to run a potential conflicts check, a slimy, preemptive legal maneuver, designed to purposefully lock Arthur out of representing me, before I even knew I needed him. They were too slow. We got there first, Arthur told me across his massive mahogany desk when I mentioned it, his eyes gleaming with a predatory excitement. You are my client now, Clara, and there is absolutely nothing your husband can do about that. That was the official beginning of Act 2 of my life, though I didn't possess the vocabulary for it yet. I just knew, in my bones, that something I had built my entire adult identity around, the sacred idea of my own marriage, my safety, my family, was a complete, elaborate illusion, and I was about to find out exactly how deep, and how dark, the lie truly went. Update 1. Arthur's elite team of investigators and forensic accountants spent the first month simply gathering financial records in absolute silence. It's the way you're supposed to play the game before you tip your hand. What they uncovered in that first 30 days was so profoundly disturbing that Arthur personally called me into his office for what he described, without a trace of his usual theatrical flair, as a conversation I physically needed to be sitting down for. Montgomery Estate Holdings, my grandfather's blood, sweat, and tears, my mother's entire legacy, had been legally restructured and dissolved exactly 12 days after my mother's funeral, not months later, when I might have eventually regained the mental strength to notice. 12 days. While I was still heavily sedated and weeping on my bathroom floor, the entire multi-million-dollar firm had been quietly folded into a newly created, untraceable holding entity with a name specifically designed to sound bureaucratic and utterly forgettable. Zenith Ventures LLC. And the sole, exclusive managing member listed on the state corporate filing was Julian Vance. I stared blankly at the heavy stock paper Arthur slid across his desk. "Arthur, this is physically impossible," I whispered, my throat tight. I never signed a single document transferring my mother's company. Her ironclad will named me as the sole successor. I am the CEO. Arthur didn't say a word. He just slowly turned to the third page of the document. There, at the very bottom, next to a notary stamp, was a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. Almost. "That is not my signature," I said, the blood rushing in my ears. Arthur nodded grimly, like he had fully expected that exact answer and had already prepared the next blow. His private forensic document analyst had independently flagged that exact same page 3 days before I ever laid eyes on it. The pen pressure was entirely inconsistent with my known, verified signatures. The specific looping formation of the M in Montgomery didn't match the 14 other verified control samples they had pulled from my joint tax returns, my hospital volunteer forms, and my mother's own original estate documents, all of which I had genuinely, physically signed. His analyst's official report gave the document a 97.4% probability of being a complete, malicious forgery. I want to pause here and say something incredibly honest, because I think it matters deeply to anyone reading this who might be trapped in a version of this psychological fog. I had signed dozens, maybe hundreds, of confusing legal documents in the traumatic months immediately after my mother died. I couldn't tell you, under oath, exactly which pieces of paper I remembered signing and which ones I didn't. That specific, hazy uncertainty is exactly what calculated predators like Julian rely on. They don't need you to be unconscious or stupid. They just need you to be too emotionally exhausted to read the fine print carefully, and too blindingly trusting to ever imagine that the man holding your hand and wiping your tears through your darkest grief is the exact same man systematically picking your pocket while he does it. Over the following agonizing weeks, the horrifying picture kept expanding outward like a black mold. Simon Rostova, the independent financial manager Julian had so gently introduced me to in our first year of marriage, had been receiving a massive $5,000 monthly retainer from an obscure Apex Logistics subsidiary account since 10 full months times before Julian even proposed to me. Every single financial recommendation Simon had ever made to me, every legacy account he had aggressively consolidated, every high-risk investment he had steered my inheritance toward, had been calculated and executed by a man whose actual, paying client the entire time was my husband. Julian noticed something had fundamentally shifted in my demeanor long before I ever confronted him directly. And the 5 excruciating weeks between my initial discovery and our legal filing became their own twisted, psychological war, fought entirely in a register just below the surface of normal, polite conversation. The first move came about 10 days after I found the hotel receipt. I had started asking very small, very careful questions. Nothing that would tip my hand, just gently testing the shape of the cage I was in. "Are you traveling back to Santa Barbara again this quarter?" I asked one evening, pushing a piece of salmon around my plate, barely eating. Julian looked up from his dinner, his eyes entirely dead and completely unreadable. With total, unhurried calm, he said that he had actually been meaning to talk to me about how deeply withdrawn and paranoid I had seemed lately. Ever since that little mix-up with the bank accounts, he said smoothly, gesturing vaguely with his fork like my terrifying discovery of my own exclusion from my own family money was just a minor, hysterical personality quirk of mine, rather than a financial coup he had engineered. "You've been so different, Clara. So distant. So cold. Is this just the pregnancy hormones acting up, or is something deeper going on with your mental health?" I remember sitting there, completely paralyzed by the sheer, sociopathic architecture of it. How effortlessly, how flawlessly he had converted my very real, very accurate suspicion into a medical symptom he could benevolently diagnose. That was the first ceiling breaking. I told myself it couldn't possibly get more disorienting than being aggressively gaslit in my own kitchen by the father of my child. I was wrong. The second move came 2 weeks later. Maya had helped me quietly print physical copies of all the forged account correspondence, and I had made the catastrophic mistake of leaving my laptop open on the kitchen island for exactly 11 minutes while I waddled to the front door to sign for a package delivery. Julian never confronted me about what he undoubtedly saw on the screen. Instead, 3 days later, he came home early. He brought me a massive bouquet of my favorite white peonies, cooked my favorite pasta dish, and told me, in a voice dripping with fake, sickening gentleness, that his mother had called him weeping. He claimed she was deeply worried about how intensely isolated and paranoid I had become since my mother's passing. He suggested that maybe it would help if I surrendered my phone and laptop to him for a few weeks, and just spent time letting the people who truly loved me take care of my fragile state. He was actively weaponizing the one relationship I still trusted completely, using his own mother's genuine kindness as a leash to cut me off from the outside world. I called his mother, Patricia, the very next day, keeping my tone light and casual. She had absolutely no memory of the tearful conversation Julian had so vividly described. That was the second ceiling breaking. The third move was the most dangerous. Because it came wrapped in something that looked, for a terrifying fleeting moment, like genuine vulnerability. 6 weeks before the court hearing, when I was nearly 7 months pregnant and visibly exhausted, I finally told Julian I wanted to hire a different, independent financial advisor, someone completely outside of Simon Rostova's firm, just to get a fresh second opinion on our joint retirement accounts before the baby arrived. Julian's face did something I had never, ever seen it do in 6 years. He looked briefly like he might actually burst into tears. He reached out, grabbing my hands tightly. He told me that if I brought in outside people, if I started treating our sacred marriage like a hostile corporate audit, he honestly didn't know how his body would survive the stress. He claimed he had been under enormous, crushing pressure at Apex Logistics. He told me, his voice cracking, that his cardiologist had flagged several highly alarming numbers at his last checkup, and that the added conflict of me doubting him might literally be more than his failing heart could take. I sat with him on the couch that entire night while he dramatically described the severe chest tightness he claimed to have felt that afternoon. I was completely torn between genuine, wifely concern and a small, freezing cold voice in the back of my mind that had started, for the first time in my life, to keep a ruthless score. I later learned, through Arthur's relentless private investigator, that Julian's last recorded cardiology and his EKG and blood panels showed absolutely no abnormal findings of any kind. He had the heart of a marathon runner. He had calculatedly used his own fabricated mortality as leverage against my survival instincts, and it had very nearly worked. The fourth move came directly, stripping away all the fake gentleness. It was the threat that finally made Maya insist I stop speaking to him entirely, communicating only through Arthur's office. 4 weeks before the hearing, Julian cornered me in the hallway. He sat me down forcefully and told me, in the exact calm, reasonable, utterly soulless voice he used for hostile board presentations, that if I dared to pursue any legal action regarding Montgomery Estate Holdings, he would have no choice but to completely reconsider how much financial support he could offer once our daughter arrived. You know how expensive contested litigation gets, Clara, he said, adjusting his expensive watch. He didn't say it like a cartoon villain making a threat. He said it like it was a simple, unfortunate law of physics, the exact same way he had always framed every horrific consequence of his own decisions as something I had somehow tragically brought upon myself. Think about what's actually best for our little girl, he whispered, resting his heavy hand briefly on my swollen stomach in a proprietary gesture that used to comfort me, but now made my skin violently crawl. I slapped his hand away, stood up, and told him I was thinking about exactly that. By the time I was 7.5 months pregnant, Arthur's team had finally assembled enough bulletproof evidence to file the massive civil and criminal complaints. The preliminary hearing was set for a Thursday morning. I remember thinking, with a bleak, suffocating kind of gallows humor, that I would be exactly as pregnant as a human being could reasonably be and still manage to waddle up the courthouse steps without going into labor. The night before the hearing, Arthur called my cell phone at 9:47 p.m. Julian's high-priced legal team had filed an emergency, bad faith motion just before midnight the previous evening. It was a desperate, chaotic scramble designed to completely reshuffle the judge's docket and buy them crucial time. It was the exact kind of last-minute, aggressive maneuver Arthur warned me was meant to rattle my nerves into requesting a postponement. If you ask the judge for more time, Clara, Arthur told me, his voice crackling over the line, Julian's team gets to control the entire narrative in the meantime. They will spend the next 3 months building a highly publicized story about your severe prenatal instability and mental decline. They will destroy your reputation before we ever see the inside of a courtroom. I sat on the cold tile of my kitchen floor, my back pressed hard against the cabinets, my hand resting protectively on my kicking stomach. And I told Arthur I wasn't postponing a damn thing. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. I laid out my conservative navy blue maternity dress, the only formal wear I owned that didn't make me feel like I was wearing a circus tent. And I took my grandmother's vintage sapphire earrings out of the heavy velvet box where they had sat untouched since my wedding day. I remember staring in the mirror, thinking that if I was going to walk into that imposing courtroom and lose absolutely everything my family had built, I wanted to at least be wearing something that belonged to a woman who had never, not once in her life, let a man push her around. Update 2. I drove myself to the courthouse the next morning through pouring rain. I walked through the heavy oak doors and sat completely alone at the defense table at 8:45 a.m., 17 minutes early. My trembling hands were folded tightly over the massive bump that had, by then, become the entire terrifying center of gravity of my life. Arthur's chair stayed completely empty. He had texted me frantically at 8:30 that a severe scheduling conflict on another high-profile case had run long, and he would be exactly 10 minutes behind. I forced myself to breathe. I told myself 10 minutes wasn't a crisis. I was wrong about that, too. Julian arrived precisely at 9:02 a.m. He was flanked by his 3 expensive attorneys, moving through the gallery with the infuriating, easy confidence of a wealthy man who had never once in his privileged life been made to wait for anything or face a single consequence. And Chloe Sutton walked in tightly on his arm. I hadn't ever seen her in person before that morning. I had only seen her in the grainy, zoomed-in hotel surveillance photos Arthur's team had pulled. In person, she was stunning. She was younger than me by at least 6 or 7 years, dressed in a sharp, tailored designer suit, already smiling radiantly at something Julian murmured into her ear before they even reached their table. She looked exactly like a woman who firmly believed she had already won the ultimate prize. Julian left his lawyers, crossed the center aisle, and crouched down right beside my chair before the bailiff had even called the massive room to order. "Sign the settlement agreement, Clara," he hissed. His voice pitched so low that only I could hear the venom in it. "Walk away today with whatever tiny shred of dignity you have left. Don't embarrass yourself in front of the judge." I looked him dead in the eyes, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I told him exactly what I wanted. I want basic child support. I want my legal 50% share of the marital assets. I want full medical coverage through my delivery. Nothing more than what is legally, objectively fair. Chloe, who had stepped up right behind him, let out a short, sharp, incredibly ugly laugh. "You purposely trapped a highly successful man with a pregnancy," she sneered, her voice loud enough that 3 people sitting in the public gallery physically turned around to stare. "And now you have the nerve to sit there and demand fairness?" I slowly turned my head. I looked her directly in the eye, my voice shaking with an ancient, primal rage. "Do not ever speak about my child." That was the exact moment her smug smile vanished. That was the moment her right shoulder rotated back, a half-second before her open palm came flying across the space between us and cracked violently against my face. The bailiff was already sprinting across the room, one hand up, shouting for everyone to stay exactly where they were. My lips split against my teeth. The copper taste of blood flooded my mouth before my brain even registered the blinding sting. My hands flew to my stomach first, always checking the baby before they ever went to my stinging cheek. Somewhere in the gallery behind me, a woman gasped loudly. Julian looked at Chloe's hand, which was still raised in the air, and he laughed. It was that quiet, private, sickening laugh. "This is exactly the severe mental instability I warned everyone about," Julian said smoothly. He didn't say it to me. He didn't say it to Chloe. He said it to the empty air, like a sociopathic narrator recording a documentary about his own flawless innocence while standing directly over the burning wreckage of his own massive lie. I looked up toward the bench. Judge Thomas Sterling was staring down at me, and then at Julian. The judge wore an expression I had never, ever seen on a judicial official's face before. It was something incredibly old, incredibly cold, and deeply dangerous. He looked exactly like a man who had just watched a piece of ordinary furniture suddenly reveal a hidden trapdoor he had walked past 1,000 times without knowing it was there. "Bailiff," Judge Sterling said, and his voice was as flat and heavy as a sealed steel vault. "Seal the courtroom." Now, the massive oak doors swung shut with a heavy thud times that seemed to physically change the air pressure in the room. Nobody dared to breathe. Nobody moved a muscle. Julian's arrogant smirk flickered. Just barely. But it was the very first crack I had seen in his armor in 6 entire years. Judge Sterling spoke my name then. My full, legal, maiden name, Clara Evelyn Montgomery, not Vance. Not the shortened, subservient version Julian had aggressively used for 6 years to slowly, methodically sand my mother's powerful family legacy off the edges of my identity. Julian's entire body went completely rigid. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, his eyes boring a hole through my husband. "Are you intimately familiar with the emergency filing submitted to this court's clerk at exactly 7:15 this morning?" Julian's lead attorney practically leaped out of his chair. "Your Honor, I must object. My client's wife has a heavily documented pattern of severe prenatal insta." "I did not ask for your opinion, counselor," the judge interrupted, without raising his voice a single decibel, which somehow made the reprimand infinitely more terrifying. "Sit down and shut your mouth." The high-priced attorney sat down so fast he nearly missed his chair. The judge reached below his heavy wooden bench and lifted a massive, thick manila folder. It was a folder that had absolutely not been sitting there when we had all walked into the room. It was a folder I would later learn Arthur Pendleton had personally hand-delivered to the clerk's office at the crack of dawn, after pulling a frantic all-night session cross-referencing 3 separate, massive Discovery Productions with a terrified whistleblower email that had mysteriously landed in his inbox at 4:12 that morning from an encrypted address. Judge Sterling opened the folder. And he read in total, absolute silence for 12 agonizing, straight minutes. No one in that sealed courtroom breathed the way living people normally breathe. I watched the judge's eyes scan rapidly down page after page. He was reading my private prenatal records, complete with my doctor's handwritten notations about unexplained bruising on my arms that I had desperately explained away as a clumsy fall on wet bathroom tile. He was reading the undeniable bank statements showing massive, structured wire withdrawals from the exact account that had once held my mother's life insurance payout withdrawals timed to the exact same week we were picking out her casket. He was reading the forensic signature analysis report, stamped with a bright red seal reading, 97.4% probability of malicious forgery, And then, near the very bottom of the massive stack, he read a printed set of text messages between Julian and Chloe. The timestamps on those texts lined up almost exactly, to the hour, with my prenatal ultrasound appointments. They were discussing financial arrangements I still could not fully make my brain absorb while sitting 8 months pregnant in a freezing courtroom. Finally, the judge slowly closed the heavy folder. He took off his reading glasses. He did it with a slow, terrifying deliberation, the exact way a powerful man does when he wants absolutely everyone in the room to understand that what comes next is not standard legal procedure. It is a final, devastating verdict on a human being's soul. He looked directly at Julian. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked at the man, and he said exactly 2 words. Both accounts. Julian's face instantly drained of all blood, turning the exact sickly, pale yellow color of the manila folder. Chloe's eyes violently cut sideways toward the heavy, sealed oak doors, like she was frantically measuring the physical distance, calculating whether there was still a reality where she could sprint out of this nightmare before anyone said her name out loud on the legal record again. Julian's attorney grabbed his client's sleeve a half-second too late to matter. The judge was already leaning over the bench, staring straight through Julian, asking him on the permanent recording whether he fully understood what those 2 words meant, or whether he needed the court to spell it out for him in front of his own pregnant wife and his own mistress. Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stared in absolute horror at that folder like it might sprout legs and start crawling toward him across the defense table. I sat there, holding my breath, watching his hands physically shake for the first time in 6 years of marriage. And in that exact second, I understood something horrifying that I hadn't let myself fully understand until that moment. I still didn't actually know everything Arthur had found at 4:12 a.m., and judging by the absolute, sheer terror draining the color out of Chloe Sutton's flawless face, neither did she. Arthur Pendleton finally burst through the courtroom doors 4 minutes later, completely out of breath, his tie slightly askew, profusely apologizing to the bench for his delay. Judge Sterling simply waved his hand. "Counselor, you are going to want to sit down and read this specific page before you say anything else on my record." What Arthur methodically laid out over the next 45 minutes, once the judge formally allowed him to address the court, was the final, devastating puzzle piece I had been missing since the exact moment I first found that Santa Barbara hotel folio hidden in a garment bag. Julian hadn't simply been unfaithful. He hadn't simply forged my signature to ruthlessly fold Montgomery Estate Holdings into a shadow shell company 12 days after my mother's funeral. He had used the exact same legal mechanism, the exact same forged signature template, and the exact same shell entity structure, Zenith Ventures LLC, through his lackey Simon Rostova to aggressively siphon money out of a private family trust belonging to Chloe Sutton. It was her late father's trust, a modest but deeply meaningful account holding exactly $175,000, specifically meant to fund the boutique interior design business she had been desperately trying to launch for 3 years. Julian had apparently spun a beautiful, convincing lie to her. He told her he was helping her access the frozen funds much faster by consolidating them under his elite corporate umbrella for maximum tax efficiency. In reality, every single penny of Chloe's $175,000 inheritance had been quietly, illegally rerouted into the exact same holding structure containing what remained of my dead mother's company. All of it was sitting under Julian's sole, exclusive managing authority. Absolutely none of it was legally accessible to either of the 2 women who were rightfully entitled to it. The specific detail that blew the entire case wide open, the one Arthur's team had found buried deep in a subpoenaed, encrypted email server just 2 nights before the hearing was a frantic message Julian had sent to Simon Rostova 11 months prior. The email read, "Use the exact same template as before. Same notary. Same firm. This makes it completely invisible. It worked flawlessly once with Clara. It'll work twice with Chloe." He had not even bothered to change his own arrogant wording. The calculated forgery that stole my mother's massive legacy, and the calculated forgery that stole Chloe's only inheritance, were, in his own documented writing, the exact same financial crime committed twice against 2 entirely different women who both blindly believed, until that very morning, that he truly loved them. I literally felt the courtroom floor tilt beneath my feet, understanding the sheer magnitude of the sociopathy all at once. Every single kindness I had mentally assigned to him over 6 years, every excuse I had desperately built on his behalf to explain away his coldness, completely collapsed under the crushing weight of a man who apparently viewed both of us not as human beings, but as interchangeable, gullible line items in the exact same financial spreadsheet. I slowly turned my head and looked over at Chloe. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at Julian. And something in her face had fundamentally, permanently broken. The arrogant, smug performance was entirely gone, replaced by something so raw, so terrified, and so deeply pathetic that I almost felt a pang of pity for the woman who had just assaulted me. "You told me it was for the business," she whispered. Her voice was quiet at first, and then it rapidly escalated into a hysterical shriek. You swore to me it would be in my business account by spring. You swore on your life. Julian didn't turn his head to face her. He kept his eyes rigidly fixed on the heavy manila folder, on the imposing judge, on absolutely anywhere in the room that wasn't the woman screaming at him. Chloe. He hissed. His voice low. Careful. Still trying to maintain control. Stop talking. We will discuss this later. There is no later. She screamed, tears ruining her expensive makeup. And for the very first time since I had laid eyes on her an hour earlier, I believed every single word she said. Judge Sterling let the chaotic, echoing silence sit in the room for a long, agonizing moment before he finally spoke again. Mr. Vance, he said, his voice echoing off the marble, this court is officially referring these massive forgery findings, both documented instances, directly to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal review and prosecution. In the meantime, I am granting an emergency, ironclad asset freeze on all accounts under Zenith Ventures LLC, effective this exact second, pending a full, exhaustive forensic accounting by the state. He paused, looking down at his notes. I am also entering an immediate temporary order fully restoring Mrs. Clara Montgomery's authorized, unfettered access to Montgomery estate holdings and all associated legacy accounts. And I am referring the matter of Miss Sutton's stolen trust to a separate civil action, should she wisely choose to pursue one. Julian's lead attorney tried one last, desperate time. Your Honor, please. If I could just have a brief moment in chambers to confer with my client. You will have all the moments you need to confer with your client in a holding cell once this courtroom reopens, the judge snapped. Right now, I want to hear from Clara Montgomery. I hadn't expected to be asked to speak on the record. I stood up incredibly slowly, my legs shaking. I braced one hand heavily on the wooden defense table, the other hand still resting protectively on my stomach, where my daughter had gone completely still, the way she always instinctively did when my heart rate spiked to dangerous levels. I looked at Julian. I really, truly looked at him. For what I deeply understood in that exact moment was one of the very last times I would ever have to look at his face as a free man. You didn't just lie to me, Julian, I said, and my voice came out shockingly steady, echoing in the dead silent room. You stood in this courtroom, you let a woman physically strike your pregnant wife in the face, and you laughed about it. He swallowed hard, but couldn't meet my eyes. You have spent 6 entire years telling me you were kindly protecting me from stress. From complexity. From having to worry my pretty head about the business my own grandfather built. You used that exact condescending phrase on me once in your office with the door closed, and I let it go because I trusted you more than I trusted my own gut. I don't anymore. I slowly turned my head and looked over at Chloe, whose shoulders were shaking violently with quiet sobs, whatever remained of her dignity entirely gone. And you, I said to her, my voice completely devoid of anger, not unkindly, because I recognized a terrifyingly familiar look in her eyes that I understood entirely too well. He did the exact same thing to you. Ask yourself, Chloe, how many other gullible women he's told that exact same lie to. Chloe didn't answer me. She couldn't. She just sat down heavily in the wooden pew in the row behind Julian's table, putting as much physical distance as possible between herself and the man she had proudly walked in on the arm of 45 minutes earlier. Julian finally looked up at me for a split second. Just a brief flicker. I saw something in his eyes that might have been close to genuine human panic before it instantly hardened back into the practiced, sociopathic calm he had worn like a second skin for 6 years. You're going to regret this, Clara, he whispered quietly, leaning forward. Making a massive public spectacle. Dragging the family company through a criminal referral. Think about what this does to the baby, growing up with all this horrible noise and scandal around her name. I felt something finally, permanently settle inside my chest. It was cold, clear, and absolute. The very last shred of fear I had been carrying for 6 years finally evaporated from my body. Don't, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Don't you ever dare put my daughter's name in your mouth again. Everything noisy, everything scandalous about this story is because of the horrific crimes you committed. Not what I am doing to survive them. My daughter is going to grow up knowing her mother stood up in a courtroom and fought back, instead of blindly signing whatever poison you put in front of her. That is the absolute only part of this story she ever needs to know. Judge Sterling banged his heavy wooden gavel once. It was more of a legal formality than a demand for order, since the room had already gone as silent as a graveyard. This hearing is adjourned pending formal criminal referral and the emergency asset freeze I have just ordered, he announced. Bailiff, unseal the doors. And place Mr. Vance in temporary custody until bail can be assessed regarding the flight risk associated with the forged assets. The bailiff moved in. The heavy doors unsealed. The next 6 weeks of my life moved faster than my traumatized brain could fully track, even living through every single exhausting hour of them. The district attorney's office officially opened a massive, formal criminal investigation the very following Monday. The 2 elite forensic accountants Arthur brought in ruthlessly traced Zenith Ventures LLC back through 4 incredibly complex layers of offshore shell structuring. They uncovered not just the forged, illegal transfer of Montgomery Estate holdings and the entirely drained trust belonging to Chloe, but a third, much smaller, almost completely overlooked account. It was an old, sentimental custodial savings account my mother had opened in my name when I was just 9 years old, meant for a modest house down payment someday. Julian had quietly folded that into Zenith Ventures 18 months into our marriage. It was $18,500, barely a rounding error compared to the millions he had stolen from the estate. But somehow, sitting in Arthur's office with the bank printout trembling in my hands, that smaller number was the one that finally broke me and made me violently sob. It felt significantly less like sophisticated corporate greed, and infinitely more like a petty, cruel theft from a child who no longer existed. The trusting girl I used to be before I ever met Julian Vance. Word moved through Charleston high society the way it always does in a wealthy city small enough that everyone's dirty business eventually intersects. Apex Logistics Board of Directors placed Julian on immediate, unpaid administrative leave within 4 days of the disastrous hearing, citing the highly publicized criminal referral and a swiftly convened internal audit that turned up 2 more glaring instances of Simon Rostova's fingerprints on corporate transactions the board had previously assumed were standard routine. Simon Rostova was formally indicted 11 weeks later on multiple felony charges of conspiracy to commit forgery, wire fraud, and severe breach of fiduciary duty. Being a coward, he immediately took a sweetheart plea deal that explicitly required his full, unredacted testimony against Julian in exchange for a significantly reduced sentence in a minimum security facility. In his 6-hour sworn deposition, Simon described, in flat, boring procedural language, exactly how the Zenith Ventures scheme had been meticulously built, brick by illegal brick. He confirmed it had started a mere 4 months into my marriage, right inside the home office I had walked into once without ever understanding what I was looking at. Chloe Sutton reached out to me exactly 8 days after the courtroom disaster. I stared at her name flashing on my phone and almost didn't answer the call. When I finally hit accept, she was violently sobbing before she even finished choking out my name. "Clara, I am not calling to ask you to forgive me for hitting you," she wept, her voice ragged. "I don't expect that. I know what I did was monstrous. I desperately needed you to know that I didn't know about your accounts. I didn't know he stole your dead mother's company. I didn't know any of it. He told me you were crazy. I thought I was the only one he actually loved." I sat with that heavy, pathetic confession for a long moment, staring out my living room window at the rain, before I answered her. "I believe you, Chloe," I said quietly, and I genuinely meant it. Though absolute belief and actual forgiveness turned out to be 2 entirely different rooms in the house of grief, and I was absolutely not ready to walk into the second one yet. She ended up aggressively filing her own civil lawsuit against Julian 3 weeks later. She was represented, at Arthur's quiet recommendation, by a ruthless colleague of his who specialized specifically in fiduciary fraud. Chloe and I were never, ever friends after that phone call. But we became unexpectedly silent allies in the exact same brutal war. We ended up sitting 2 rows apart at 3 separate, grueling criminal hearings over the following year, offering each other tight, exhausted nods that weren't exactly warmth, but certainly weren't hatred either. Not everyone in my life responded to the fallout the way I expected. My mother's younger sister, my Aunt Beatrice, who I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 full years after a bitter disagreement about the estate, a disagreement that I now understood with fresh, horrifying eyes had been entirely engineered by Julian behind the scenes to isolate me, called a week after the hearing and cried on the phone for 10 straight minutes before she could get a full sentence out. "I tried to warn you at the funeral, Clara," she sobbed. "You screamed at me that I was just grieving badly and taking it out on Julian." I didn't correct her. I just let her cry. She wasn't wrong. Brenda Carmichael, my mother's old, fiercely loyal attorney, the one I had watched speed out of our driveway in tears 3 years earlier without ever once calling her back, agreed to heavily consult with Arthur's legal team once the criminal referral hit the local papers. And it was her original, unaltered, stamped version of the Montgomery estate succession documents, the exact one she had drafted with my mother 8 months before she died, that ultimately became the cleanest, most undeniable piece of hard evidence proving what the real legal plan had always been before Julian forged his way over it. The massive legal proceedings dragged on with the particular, grinding, soul-crushing slowness of anything involving heavy forensic accounting and federal criminal referrals. The forensic team's final, bound report ran to 214 pages. It meticulously traced roughly $2.8 million across the combined, convoluted schemes touching Montgomery Estate, my childhood account, and Chloe's trust. Julian, realizing he was completely cornered and facing decades, eventually accepted a heavy plea agreement rather than face a highly publicized jury trial. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of aggravated forgery and 1 massive count of corporate embezzlement. He received a strict sentence of 6 years in federal prison, with the absolute earliest possibility of parole after 3, alongside a crippling restitution order covering the full stolen amount plus aggressive interest. Montgomery Estate Holdings Board, with Brenda Carmichael's brilliant help, was entirely restructured under my direct, legal control within 4 months. We rapidly restored the exact governance framework my mother had built. The one Julian had spent 3 years quietly dismantling. My beautiful daughter, Madeline, was born 5 weeks after that horrific courtroom hearing, on a freezing Tuesday morning in late November, 3 weeks earlier than her actual due date. It was almost as if she had absorbed some of the terrifying urgency of the year she had spent listening to all of the screaming from the inside, and decided she needed to get out. I was in a bright hospital delivery room with Maya holding my left hand and Aunt Beatrice holding my right. Two incredible women who had shown up for me in ways I hadn't fully let myself need before that nightmare year. Julian was absolutely not there. He had been formally served with a heavily modified, judge-ordered no-contact order 9 days earlier. I remember thinking, in the strange, floating, euphoric exhaustion right after the nurses finally placed Madeline's warm, crying body on my chest, that this was the very first entirely uncomplicated, pure joy I had felt in over 14 months. And that she wholly deserved to be the reason for that joy, not a tragic footnote in her father's criminal unraveling. The logistics of legally untangling an entire life from a sociopath like Julian took far longer than the actual criminal case itself. There were dozens of joint accounts to aggressively close, each one requiring its own exhausting set of notarized affidavits. There was the massive, hollow house, which Arthur strongly advised me to sell immediately rather than fight to keep, since half its equity was still tied up in vicious litigation over exactly how much of the original down payment had originated from money later traced directly to Zenith Ventures. I gladly sold it. I moved into a much smaller, sun-drenched 2-bedroom place near the Children's Hospital where I still happily volunteered. It had a wraparound porch that caught the morning light perfectly, and I found, somewhat to my own shock, that smaller suited my soul infinitely better than the cold, echoing mansion I had shared with Julian ever had. There was a massive tax complication, too, an entire spring spent locked in a room with a brilliant accountant to properly characterize the court-ordered restitution payments as they slowly began arriving quarterly, a fraction of what had been taken, but real, tangible money nonetheless, finally landing in accounts that were, for the first time in 6 years, entirely and verifiably mine. Walter Greer's testimony, once it was fully entered into the public record, filled in the absolute last agonizing gaps I had been carrying around as unanswered questions in my chest. He confirmed under oath that Brenda Carmichael's driveway confrontation, the one I had never followed up on, had happened because she had noticed a glaring irregularity in the succession paperwork within mere weeks of my mother's sudden death. She had tried twice to reach me directly, but Julian had intercepted both calls, and told her falsely that I had aggressively demanded she stop contacting the family during my fragile grieving period. Hearing that truth months later, reading it in a cold deposition transcript Arthur forwarded to me, was its own small, quiet, devastating grief. Brenda had truly tried to save me. I had simply never been given the chance to hear her warning. I want to be brutally honest about the parts of this story that absolutely do not resolve neatly, because I think internet stories like this one too often skip past the messy trauma for the sake of a clean Hollywood ending. Madeline will grow up eventually, and she will inevitably ask hard questions about her father. I don't yet know exactly what words I will use to tell her. I only know that I promised myself the story will be 100% true, it will be age appropriate, and it will never, ever ask her to carry my heavy anger for me. Chloe and I still exchange a brief text message every few months. Mostly logistical updates about the ongoing civil payouts, sometimes almost warm. We are two women who share absolutely nothing in common except having blindly trusted the exact same monster, and having eventually told the truth about it in the exact same room. Julian writes to me sometimes from the Federal Correctional Facility. The letters are sent to Arthur's office, where his paralegals screen them before I ever see them. Most of them I don't ever answer, they are full of the same manipulative, victim-blaming garbage he always spewed. Though twice, when Madeline was very small, I sent back a single, printed photograph of her with absolutely no note attached, because even now, I can't quite make myself believe that a child should be entirely hidden from the man who fathered her, whatever else that man turned out to be. The brutal custody arrangement, once it was finally settled, ended up vastly simpler than I expected. Mostly because Julian's felony plea agreement and subsequent federal incarceration removed most of the highly contested questions that would otherwise have dragged us through family court for another year. The tough-as-nails judge overseeing that separate proceeding granted me sole legal and physical custody, with a strict provision allowing only heavily supervised visitation once Julian's prison sentence concluded and only contingent on a court-ordered, extensive psychological evaluation and a demonstrated period of stability. I don't know, honestly, what I will do when that provision becomes relevant in real time. I try not to solve terrifying problems 3 years before they arrive. I've had enough practice learning to live one honest day at a time. I started seeing a brilliant trauma therapist, Dr. Aris, about 2 months after the initial hearing. Initially, I just went to manage the acute, suffocating stress of the ongoing litigation. But I stayed in that leather chair far longer than I expected to, because it turned out there was a great deal more underneath the immediate crisis that desperately deserved attention. We spent countless sessions on a brutal question I hadn't let myself ask directly until she asked it for me. Not times why times did Julian do this, which had an answer I already understood. Entitlement dressed up as competence, deep resentment of my mother's massive success, a sociopathic taste for control. But times why times had I made myself so incredibly available to it? That question took far longer to sit with. The honest answer, the one I arrived at slowly over the better part of a year of crying in her office, was that I had spent my entire life being the exhausted daughter of a terrifyingly formidable woman. And some quiet, unexamined, weak part of me had married a man who promised to let me be smaller, because smaller felt, for a little while, like rest. I don't say that to excuse what Julian did. Absolutely nothing excuses it. But deeply understanding my own subconscious part in building the exact conditions that let his trap close around me has mattered to my psychological recovery every bit as much as the criminal conviction did. Madeline is 2 years old now. She has my late mother's stubborn, jutting chin, and infuriatingly, she has Julian's easy, crinkling laugh. I finally stopped flinching every time I catch that specific resemblance, because she is entirely her own person. And it isn't fair to her to keep a bitter score of which parts of her face belong to which of the deeply flawed people who made her. Montgomery Estate Holdings finished its second full fiscal year under my direct leadership this spring. We are back to the kind of quiet, steady, massive profitability my grandfather originally built it on. I sit in my mother's old corner office now, at her old, heavy oak desk, which I had beautifully refinished rather than replaced, because some broken things deserve to be carefully restored, instead of just thrown out. I think about that sealed courtroom often. More than I expected to, given how badly I wanted to leave it behind. I think about the exact sound of Chloe's hand cracking against my face, and how incredibly strange it is that the absolute worst, most humiliating moment of that entire ordeal turned out to be the exact moment that finally cracked the truth wide open. I think about Julian's laugh, quiet, private, arrogant, and how I used to hear genuine affection in sounds exactly like that, back when I didn't yet know what it actually meant when a man laughs at your pain instead of flinching from it. And I think, most of all, about Judge Sterling's 2 heavy words, both accounts, and how strange it is that the exact phrase which permanently ended my marriage was also the phrase that told me, for certain, that I had never been the only one he was capable of doing this to. You don't walk out of a courtroom like that feeling like you won the lottery. You walk out feeling like you barely survived a burning building that should never have been built in the first place. You carry a heavy version of grief for a marriage that was never real, sitting right alongside something that feels unmistakably like pure relief. Both of those conflicting things live inside me now. Most days, at the exact same time. I lost 6 years of my youth I can never get back. I lost a version of innocent trust I don't know if I will ever fully rebuild with anyone else. What I gained was smaller, stranger, and most days, it is enough. A beautiful daughter who will never once have to wonder whether her mother knew how to stand up for her. A massive company restored to the integrity it was actually built on. And the particular, hard-won piece of a woman who was slapped across the face in open court, exactly 8 months pregnant, and absolutely refused to fold. There's a fantasy version of this story, the version I sometimes imagine other people telling at dinner parties where the ending is much louder, where Julian gets exactly what he deserves and rots forever, and I feel something clean and triumphant watching it happen, where Chloe stays a one-dimensional villain instead of becoming, in her own complicated way, someone I deeply understand, where the stolen money comes back completely whole, and the stolen years come back with it. That isn't the ending I got. And I've made my peace with that, mostly on the days when peace is available to me. Some days, it just isn't. Some days I still find myself standing in my new kitchen, my hand gripping the granite counter, remembering the exact sickening sound of that slap, and I have to physically sit down on the floor until the panic passes. What I've learned, if there's a single, undeniable thread running underneath all of this trauma, is that the people who hurt us the most rarely look like cartoon villains while they're actively destroying us. Julian never once in 6 years raised his voice at me. He never broke a single dish in anger, or slammed a single door. He simply narrated my own life back to me, slightly altered, one calm, reasonable sentence at a time, until I literally couldn't tell the difference between his fabricated version of events and my own gut instincts anymore. That's a much harder thing to explain to a jury than a physical bruise. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't fit neatly into a single dramatic scene, except, I suppose, for the one specific scene where a stranger's hand finally did what 6 years of quiet, insidious manipulation couldn't, which was leave a mark visible enough that absolutely everyone in the room, myself included, finally had to look directly at what was happening. Arthur closed our massive legal file formally 13 months after the hearing. He told me at our last meeting, pouring me a glass of scotch, that in 22 years of practicing vicious family law, he had handled maybe 4 cases with a paper trail as flawlessly clean as the one his team had built against Julian. He told me most victims never get anything close to that kind of total vindication. Not because their stories are less true, but because the hard evidence simply isn't there to prove what they already know in their bones. I've thought about that reality a lot since. How much of what happened to me was true justice? And how much of it was just blind luck? A garment bag left unzipped, a whistleblower email that just happened to land at 4:12 inches the morning. A judge willing to read for 12 straight minutes in dead silence instead of rushing his packed docket. I try to hold both of those truths at once. I fought for this outcome with absolutely everything I had in me. I also got luckier than most women in my position ever do, and I don't think it does anyone any favors to pretend otherwise. I still have my grandmother's vintage sapphire earrings. I wore them again last month to the Montgomery Estate Spring shareholder dinner. I caught my reflection in the massive ballroom window before I walked in and thought, not for the first time, that some inheritances can be stolen and rebuilt, and some can never be taken from you at all, no matter how long a man spends trying. The slap left no permanent mark on my face. What it left instead was the absolute last piece of proof I needed that the man I had built a life around had never, not once in 6 years, actually seen me as a human being capable of leaving him. He was dead wrong about that. And I think, in the end, that massive miscalculation is the only part of this entire horrific story he never managed to explain his way out of. Sometimes, driving Madeline home from the hospital on Thursday afternoons, I pass the Charleston courthouse without meaning to. The route just happens to run right past it, and I slow down without deciding to, the way you naturally slow down near any place that once held the absolute worst hour of your life. I don't feel dread anymore when I look at those massive marble steps. Mostly, I feel something closer to deep respect for the terrified, exhausted version of myself who walked up those steps completely alone at 8:45 inches the morning, 17 minutes early, 8 months pregnant, wearing her grandmother's sapphires, with absolutely no idea that within the hour, a stranger's hand would do what 6 years of careful manipulation never quite managed. Make the truth impossible for anyone in that room to look away from. I wasn't lucky enough to avoid what happened to me. But I was lucky enough, in the very end, to be believed. My wife declared, "Plenty of men want me," so I walked away, giving her the freedom to pursue what she believed was better for her. In the midst of an argument, my wife stated, "Plenty of men want me." So I left her to those men to handle. I never expected it to go down like this. It all started with a dumb quarrel, one of those minor, daily things that you forget about later but seem like the world is ending when they happen. She'd been onto me about something small, as usual, something about not putting out the garbage on time or perhaps not answering her phone soon enough when she was out with her pals. It was no big thing. Except she'd been carrying a lot of frustration lately, and I was the only one around to vent it on. That is when she said it. Plenty of men would want me. She spat the words out, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me, challenging me to respond. The words hung there, weighty and piercing, more cutting than anything she'd spoken previously. We'd been through tough times before, certainly, but nothing had ever made me feel quite this way. It wasn't the first time we'd battled about something minor, but this seemed different. I wasn't prepared for the rage that erupted in my chest. Perhaps it was because, in the midst of the dispute, I understood she meant it. She wasn't just saying things to hurt me, there was truth behind them. A fact I could no longer ignore. The truth ached. She was not the same lady I had married. "I don't care about those men," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But it broke. I wasn't sure if I was angry or embarrassed about how I handled it. I was tired, mentally fatigued from attempting to cling onto something that seemed to be slipping away. But I wasn't sure how to stop it. The tension in the room grew. My heart began hammering in my chest, like if it were trying to escape. I could feel my pulse in my throat, fingers, and all over my body. I wasn't sure how to calm down. I didn't know how to convince her that I was doing my best. I was trying to be there for her. But nothing was ever sufficient. She did not back down either. In fact, she appeared almost pleased, as if she had won something I hadn't realized I was playing for. "Oh, I know you don't care. But you should. Maybe you'd actually start doing something right for once if you did," she told me. Her comments were chilly, yet with a hint of something deeper behind them. Something I couldn't quite identify. Resentment? Regret? A sense of accomplishment, as if she had finally found the way to break me. I wanted to say something, but my throat tightened suddenly. I wasn't sure if I was trying to save the person I believed I was fighting for or the notion of her. The one I'd been clinging onto for years. The person I thought I knew. She looked away, arms folded, her countenance unreadable. I could feel the distance between us increasing. Not simply in the gap between our bodies, but also in the way she began to stare at me. Her eyes did not soften when they met mine. Like I was no longer the person she cared about. I wanted to shout. To proclaim that I did not deserve this. That I'd been nothing but patient. Nothing except the present. Nothing but here for her. And she didn't notice it. But what good would it do? She was already checked out. I could see it in the way she carried herself, the way she avoided eye contact. It seemed as if she'd already decided. I felt little. Perhaps she was right. Maybe there were plenty more men out there who wanted her and could provide what I couldn't. But I was not going to be the one begging for morsels of affection. So I left. It was not dramatic. There were no slam doors, yelling battles, or emotional goodbyes. I did not even pack a bag. I grabbed my jacket, slung it over my shoulders, and stepped out the door. Perhaps I should have felt more angry, sad, or confused. But all I felt was this strange, numb sensation of clarity. This was not working. She was not working. I wasn't working for her anymore. I wasn't sure where I was headed. I just couldn't stay there. Not now. Not after what she had said. It isn't like I hadn't considered leaving before. But this time, it felt different. This time, there was no going back. I didn't visit a friend's residence. I didn't call anyone to inform them what occurred. I simply drove. The kilometers passing felt like the world was dragging me away from everything. Away from the mess I'd gotten myself into. The silence in the automobile was like a shield. The only sounds were the hum of the tires on the road and the rhythm of my pulse. I ended up at a bar. Alone. It wasn't a classy establishment, but rather a rundown dive with the odor of old beer and fried food. But I didn't care. I ordered a drink, leaned against the counter, and felt the wine burn down my throat, as if it was washing everything away. It was the first time in months that I felt something, anything. The bartender gave me a knowing look. But I didn't care. I did not want anyone to know. I did not wish to explain. Then the door opened. Someone walked in. They grabbed my eye, just a fleeting glance, but I noticed how they stared at me. Not like a broken man. Not like someone who has recently left his wife, but, maybe, someone they could chat to? Perhaps there is someone they can be around. I did not know. And I didn't care. I knew they didn't see me in the same way she did, and for once, it seemed like it was all I needed. But I was not prepared to make any judgments. Not yet. The night was still early. I just kept drinking, letting the hours pass, feeling a strange sense of liberation develop within me. And then, I heard her name. A voice sounded from behind me. She said she'd leave you? I glanced around expecting to see someone I know. But the man speaking was unfamiliar. Nonetheless, his comments wounded deeply. What the hell? I turned slowly, trying to figure out why this stranger's comments felt like a punch in the gut. He was seated a few stools down, nursing his own drink, his gaze occasionally traveling to mine as he spoke. She said she'd leave you, he continued, more casually this time, as if we were already having the conversation. My heart stutters. My mind raced to catch up and grasp what this guy was expressing. Was he speaking about my wife? How in the hell did he know? Had she told anyone? Had she been informing others? I wasn't sure what to say. I just gazed at him, trying to decide if I should stand up and leave or ask him to elaborate. Who the hell are you? I finally managed to speak, though the words came out colder than I wanted. I was not searching for a confrontation, but I couldn't control myself. This guy knew something, and it made my stomach turn. He smirked, as if he had been waiting for this moment. But instead of providing an explanation, he simply shrugged, as if the solution were obvious. She didn't think you'd leave, he explained. Thought you'd just hang around, put up with whatever she threw at you. My mind was whirling. He had the audacity to talk about my life as if he knew everything. What did he know? What had she told him? I grasped the edge of the bar to keep myself stable. But there was an uncomfortable sensation crawling up my spine. Why are you telling me this? I inquired, my voice a little more calm now, but the anxiety was setting in. My fingers remained tight over my glass, as if it were necessary to keep me grounded. He took a slow sip from his drink and continued to act as if we were having a normal chat. As if he were some sort of confidant. Or something else. He did not appear to be uncomfortable. She came in here a few weeks ago, stated the worker. With someone else. I froze. My mind immediately flashed back to every time I had doubted her faithfulness. Every tiny adjustment in her behavior. Every unusual excuse. What do you mean, with someone else? I inquired, already anticipating the response. The man's eyes shifted to me, this time sharper. As if he knew he had my entire attention. I mean, she came in here with another guy. They were really cozy. She didn't even notice me watching. Guess she thought I was just another regular at the bar. I felt nauseous. I'd never had any tangible evidence of her unfaithfulness before. But hearing that from a stranger, someone who appeared so certain, felt like a brick slamming into my chest. I wanted to yell at him, to demand information, to get him to return it. But I could not find the words. Instead, I found myself leaning forward, my elbows on the bar, as if being closer would make everything seem less real. "You're sure?" My voice was lower and almost pleading. I hated myself for asking, but I couldn't resist. I needed to know. The man leaned back and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Oh yeah." She was laughing, touching his arm, getting pretty close. She didn't even care who saw. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud and quick. My entire body was on fire. But I didn't feel angry. It was a deep, gnawing ache, as if someone had chiseled out a portion of me that I had no idea existed. I wasn't sure what was worse. The possibility that she had been with someone else. Alternatively, she had not given it a second consideration. "I don't think she cares much about you anymore," the man said nonchalantly, as if he were merely giving general advice. He gave me a look that made me feel vulnerable, as if he knew something I didn't want to disclose. I wasn't sure what to say. I could feel myself beginning to unravel. Piece by piece. Everything she had stated? The things I had disregarded or attributed to stress or something else. Was it all leading up to this? Was this the moment when everything I thought I knew about my life, my relationship, fell apart? I gazed at the man, hoping for a response, some kind of closure. But he wasn't offering anything else. He drank his drink, looked aside, and signaled for another. As if this wasn't a significant issue to him. I wanted to shout. But I did not. I left. I scarcely noticed the stroll to my car. The frigid air pierced through me. The engine hums as it starts up. It seemed like everything had changed in an instant. Like the world was no longer a place where I could simply glide along thinking everything was all right. As I traveled into the night, my mind was racing with ideas and possibilities. I wasn't sure where I was headed anymore. I wasn't sure if I was escaping from her, or simply attempting to escape the sense of betrayal that had settled into my bones. I eventually pulled into a parking lot. One I did not recognize. The silence of the night surrounded me. The only sound was the gentle hum of the car's engine. I looked out the window, attempting to make sense of what had just occurred. But something else was nagging at me now. Something I didn't consider in the excitement of the moment. What if I wasn't the only person who had left? What if she were waiting for me to leave, so she could finally make her own decisions? I wasn't certain I wanted to find out. But I knew I needed to. I spent the next 3 days in a blur, mostly driving around, trying to clear my mind. But the ideas did not stop. Every street reminded me of her. Of everything we had built. And everything was crumbling apart. My phone rang several times, but I didn't have the energy to respond. I did not want to hear from her. Not yet. Not while everything seemed so raw. Then came the message. A basic text. Nevertheless, it felt like a bomb exploded in my lap. "We need to talk." I looked at the text on the screen. My hand shook slightly as I read them repeatedly. I wasn't sure what she would say. But I could feel the tempest brewing inside me again. I did not want to chat. Not yet. Not while things remained so ambiguous. But I could not ignore it. I needed to know where we stood. I responded simply. "I will be there." When I arrived at the residence, it was really silent. The front door was slightly ajar. The silence inside felt almost ominous. It was too vacant. Too still. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded together. She seemed smaller than I remembered. When she saw me, her eyes were a jumble of things. Guilt, perhaps. Or fear. I could not tell. There was also something else there. Something I couldn't quite identify. She didn't look at me the same way she had previously. Not the way I was used to seeing her. Her glance was not warm, no connection. "I didn't know where else to start," she explained, breaking the stillness. Her voice was soft yet steady. "I owe you an explanation." I swallowed the lump in my throat. It felt thick. "You owe me more than that." The words came out sharper than I intended. But I didn't care. I needed answers. I wanted something to make sense of this chaos. She did not respond to the severity of my tone. Instead, she groaned and looked down at her hands. "I never meant for things to get this bad. But things weren't right, were they?" I didn't know how to fix it, and maybe I wasn't even trying anymore. I simply stared at her, my thoughts reeling. She was not even trying. That is what it boiled down to. I had overlooked all those subtle signs. All those occasions when I should have asked inquiries. I'd been too busy pretending that everything could be mended. That we could return to the way things used to be. She took a deep breath. For a brief moment, I thought she may cry. However, she didn't. Instead, she proceeded. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought if I pushed you far enough, you'd be the one to walk away. It would have been easier that way, right? But you didn't. You stuck around. And I kept pushing. And then, when I met someone else? She paused. I don't know. It felt like I was already done before it even started. My brain was spinning. Someone else. The word struck me harder than expected. It wasn't only the argument. Or her snarky remarks. It wasn't only that she appeared distant and frigid. She'd actually been with someone. What the hell are you talking about? I eventually choked out. My hands were clenched, but I was scarcely conscious of them. You think you can just go out and do whatever you want and I wouldn't notice? I didn't believe I was living in a fiction. But perhaps I was? Perhaps she was. She looked up at me, her eyes full of something, regret. I never wanted to hurt you, but I wasn't happy. I couldn't tell you that. I didn't know how. The silence stretched between us. A chasm that seemed impossible to cross. All these years. All of the moments we had shared. So here we were. Sitting in the kitchen. Strangers. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. So what now? You just expect me to walk back into this like nothing happened? I shook my head, my frustration finally spilling out. You think I just forget? That I let you shut me out like that and then come back? I'm sorry, she whispered. Her face wrinkled, but she did not respond. Instead, she looked away, as if she couldn't take the weight of my words. I stepped back and ran my hand through my hair. Attempting to think. Attempting to breathe. You were right about one thing, I told you. My voice was shaking now, even though I fought to keep it steady. I did leave. You wanted me to go? And I did. But not for the reasons you think. She blinked, a scowl forming on her forehead. What do you mean? I felt a rush of bitter laughter rise in my chest. But I did not let it out. Not yet. I left because I finally saw it. I saw that you don't see me anymore. I'm just someone you're stuck with. Someone who will always be here, no matter how much you push. You made me feel small. And then you decided it wasn't enough. So you found someone else. Her voice was scarcely audible now. It wasn't like that. It was a mistake. An error. I scoffed as the ache in my chest made it difficult to breathe. You don't just make a mistake like that. You make choices. You make decisions. And you chose him. The hush that followed was smothering. Neither of us knew what to say next, because the truth came out. It was in the air, heavy and obvious. She'd betrayed me. And I had to make a decision. Can I live with that? Could I even attempt to restore what we had? Or was it simply too far gone? I turned towards the door. My body felt weary. My heart was broken. But something inside me stood taller than it has in months. I can't do this anymore, I murmured quietly. I'm done. I walked out the door without saying another word. I did not glance back. And as I drove away, the weight on my chest gradually lifted, little by little. The route ahead was unclear. It was not easy. For the first time in a long while, I was making my own decision. And maybe, that was all I needed to do. I spent 2 years in prison for my sister, but upon release, my family coldly rejected me, treating me as worthless. Get out! Get out! Get out! Seamus was furious, grabbing my collar and attempting to haul me outside. Don't touch me. I forcefully shrugged off his grasp, forcing him to stumble and almost collapse. Smack! Melanie walked forward without saying anything and slapped me hard across the face. Jonathan, you're no longer the lobby manager making tens of thousands of dollars a month. You are no longer a valuable individual. Did you really expect us to put up with you? She yelled down the hallway. Security. Where is security? When the security guards heard this, they raced over. Melanie pointed at me and yelled at the security officers. How can you allow anyone in here? Get this beggar out of here now. The chief of security approached Melanie and kindly said, Ma'am, what is the problem? Melanie pointed at me again. This man is a penniless beggar attempting to scam a meal here. Get him out. The security chief stared at me coldly and said, Sir, please leave. I normally kept a quiet profile, rarely revealing my role as hotel owner. Even though I lived and ate here, only high management knew who I was. When I saw the head of security trying to toss me out so rapidly, I fixed him with a harsh look and asked, Is this how you handle situations? Don't you understand the hotel's policies? We should not judge anyone based on their appearance or offend any guest. The security chief's eyes flickered with apprehension. He gazed at me uncomfortably, not daring to say anything. When Seamus saw this, he grew anxious. Don't let him trick you, he's simply a broke ex-con. Throw him out. Sorry, sir. We don't eject any guests without a reason. The security chief strongly declined Seamus' request. This is ridiculous. So, what are you security men doing? Are you terrified of him after only a few words? Gavin shouted at the guards before returning his gaze to me. Jonathan, I don't believe you can bluff your way out of this. I know the hotel management. One call from me and you're out. With that, he took out his phone and called. Mr. Feldman, it's Gavin, I'm busy. The call ended abruptly with a frigid response, leaving Gavin standing awkwardly holding his phone. I scoffed and calmly asked, You want to talk with Mr. Feldman? Allow me to help you. I got out my phone and dialed Mr. Feldman. Come to private room 777 within 3 minutes. Are you out of your mind, Jonathan? You are a broke ex-con. Do not claim to be someone important here. We know what kind of person you are. Is there any reason to put on this act? Gavin scoffed at me. The other relatives looked at me like I was a clown, with derision and disgust on their faces. Melanie wiped the sweat from her brow and whispered, embarrassed. This is so humiliating. How did I raise my son like this? James also appeared frustrated. Jonathan, please leave. Stop pretending. You are making a fool of yourself and your family. Exactly? Some poor folks have lost their minds and created delusions. Gavin scoffed. He couldn't even get Mr. Feldman here. Do you think you can? That's ridiculous, Seamus hissed, his tone full of scorn. He glanced at me as if simply acknowledging my presence was beneath him. But, just as he finished speaking, a middle-aged woman in a suit appeared by our side. I took the fall for my sister and served 2 years in prison. But when I got out, my sister and brother-in-law were concerned that I would compete for the property and assist my parents in attempting to push me out of the house. 2 years ago, Joanna and Seamus were speeding and traveling in the wrong direction with my car when they collided and murdered someone. My folks approached me quickly. They claimed Joanna had a weak heart but had ultimately managed to marry. If she went to prison, not only would she lose her marriage, but her life may be jeopardized. They cried and asked me to accept the blame for her. They assured me that the entire family would handsomely reward me once I was out. I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because I loved my parents and genuinely cared for my sister. I made personal sacrifices for her, including going to prison, selling my car, depleting my money, losing my job, paying the compensation, and enduring all of the insults. But I never anticipated my heartfelt sacrifice to be met with such treachery and scorn. I do not comprehend. Isn't blood meant to be thicker than water? Why does family loyalty wane in the face of personal gain? Joanna's expression darkened with disdain when she heard my words. She responded, I've already thanked you for taking the fall. What else do you want from me? This house is now in my name, and Seamus and I are expecting a kid in a few months. There isn't enough room. You have to relocate. We cannot afford to maintain an idler. In her opinion, 2 years in prison was barely worth one thank you. Asking for more made me appear unreasonable. Melanie interjected, Nino, don't you understand? A man's fate is to marry and provide for his family rather than to rely on them. We hope to marry you off to a respectable woman and get some security. However, as an ex-convict, no one will want you. Letting you stay here is already something we're thinking about for nostalgic reasons. Seamus said. Exactly. You've been in prison, so you'll remain impoverished indefinitely. If we let you stay, you'll drain us dry. He warned, his tone harsh. James extinguished his cigarette and replied coldly, Jonathan, you've grown up now. It's time you recognize the value of giving to the family rather than making problems. Each of their words was like a sharp razor cutting my heart. Despite my intense disappointment, my eyes welled up. I stared at them and exclaimed, hoarsely, no wonder you never paid me a visit during my 2 years in prison. I assumed you were just too busy to see me. But now I realize, you only regarded me as a moneymaker. You kicked me out without hesitation when I couldn't make money anymore. I cocked my head back, trying to keep back tears. Then I inquired. So you're all determined to kick me out today? Yes, Seamus responded without hesitation. Melanie, Joanna, and James all appeared determined. Obviously, there was no space for negotiating. I saw no affection in their eyes. I nodded, my heart devastated. Fine. As you wish. We're done starting today. And I hope you don't regret it. Finally, I saw them for what they were. These folks, who I longed for during my 2 years in prison, did not deserve my sacrifices. However, the $100 million I had intended to split with them would now remain with me. I walked out the door without saying anything else and did not glance back. Behind the door, I heard Seamus' furious roar. "You think too highly of yourself. What's there to lose by cutting connections with a broke ex-convict like you? If we let you stay here and mooch off us, we'll truly regret it." After leaving that callous home, I explored the streets alone for quite some time before finding a hotel to stay at. Lying on the bed, I gazed at the 9-figure number in my bank account, lost in thought. I used to believe I grew up in a pretty happy family. When I was having challenges at work, my father patiently comforted and guided me. When I worked late at the office, my mother would bring me my favorite supper. When it rained, my sister would come and pick me up at work. I felt like the family's most cherished young prince. I was always perplexed when I saw tales online about parents preferring daughters over sons. How can such families exist? How could they not love their sons? But now I understand that dreadful sensation of helplessness and disappointment. I realized I had always been a member of such a family. All of the love I'd felt was predicated on my usefulness to them. I was more of an investment. Their love was the price, and my money was the reward. As a result, the gifts of fate had always come at a hidden cost. They smiled warmly when I told them I could generate money while also providing a nice living for everyone. But now they saw me as an ex-convict who couldn't find work and had no money or value. Their love had evaporated entirely. Little did they know, this ex-con had $100 million in his account. I couldn't help but be a little excited, wondering how they'd react if the son they loathed the most reached the pinnacle of success one day. The next day, I checked into a hotel in the city center. This wasn't just any hotel, it was a high-end, vast operation that offered dining, housing, banquets, and even business services. It had 8 levels and occupied the entire building. The location, surroundings, and foot traffic were all great. Before going to prison, I worked as a hotel lobby manager. Naturally, I wanted to return to my previous profession. Only this time, instead of being a manager, I'm the owner. I spent several hours negotiating with the hotel's owner before buying it from her. That same day, I assumed management responsibility. From then on, I lived and ate at the hotel, utilizing every opportunity to study and build new management and operational tactics. Under my direction, the hotel's business grew to the point that reservations were nearly impossible to come by. I quickly became a legitimately affluent man in the city. 6 months later, while inspecting the dining department, I overheard Joanna talking in a secluded area. "This motel is quite popular. I had to plan my daughter's 1-month birthday party 2 months in advance simply to get a table. I've heard that only the creme de la creme may dine here. Joanna, you made it, bringing us to such a luxurious location." I stopped in place when I discovered Joanna had invited our parents and a large group of relatives to this private room to celebrate her newborn daughter's 1-month birthday. Melanie was showing off by filming videos on her phone. My face appeared in the shot as her camera panned to the door. "Jonathan! What are you doing here?" Melanie set down her phone and frowned at me. When they heard this, everyone in the room turned to face me, who was standing in the doorway. "Jonathan, do you have no shame? You knew we were hosting a banquet here today and followed us only to get some food." Seamus raced up and chastised me like I was the plague. "Who said I was here to scrounge for food?" I responded calmly. "What are you here for, if not to beg? This is a high-end establishment exclusively for the privileged. If you're hungry, search through the rubbish outside." "That's where you belong," she snarled, crossing her arms and staring at me with disgust. The other family frowned and glared at me, disgusted, as if I were an unpleasant fly. Joanna also spoke up, apparently unhappy. "Jonathan, when you stated you wanted to cut connections with us, I believed you had some fortitude. But now you've resorted to following us for a free supper. It's just horrible." Before I could react, James joined in. "Jonathan, I educated you at a young age to be self-sufficient and dignified. Have you forgotten? How could you give up your pride for a meal?" I stared at them and scoffed. "It's only a meal. It does not matter to me. You are really something, aren't you? Sour grapes. As if an impoverished ex-con like you could ever afford a lunch here. Even if you've worked your entire life," Seamus sneered. "My sister crashed my wedding but was arrested for kidnapping. Now that she is facing jail, my parents want me to help, but I refuse. So, I, 24F, got married about a week ago, and things went very wrong. Let me start from the beginning. I have an older sister named Stacy, 26F. We have always had a strong sibling rivalry, and I am serious about it. Growing up, We despised each other because we were always trying to outdo each other. We never got along, and as we grew older, we continued to despise each other. We were sure not to show others how much we loathed one another, but it was all there beneath the surface. When we were living together, she and I didn't talk to each other and simply put up a show for our family members when they visited. But even our parents realized we didn't like each other, and they never tried to make things right between us. In some ways, I believe that is what led to so many things going wrong in the end. But I will get to that later. She moved out when she was 18 to attend college, and I was relieved because it meant I could finally be myself around the house instead of continuously walking on eggshells because of her. She would only come back for the holidays and talk about how wonderful her life was since she was attending one of the greatest business schools in the state. I was a little jealous of her, but my sole goal was to work harder than her and get into a better place, which I achieved. I was accepted into an Ivy League school. That was a great slap in the face for her, and I was celebrated far more than she ever was. I expected that getting into an Ivy League institution would put a stop to our competition, but that did not happen. She suddenly revealed that she was beginning her own business. She completed the task with the assistance of my father. I'm not sure if it was luck or hard effort, but her firm took off a few years ago, and she relocated to Japan to expand the technological side of it. It was a huge success, and our parents were really proud of her. That was roughly 2 years ago. Since then, she has lived in Japan. Unfortunately, things didn't go so well for me once I finished college. The fact that Stacy was succeeding so much only exacerbated the situation. I had gotten a job, but it was nowhere as glamorous or rewarding as what she was doing. So I quit shortly after joining. That was a terrible mistake, and I know it now because I should have stayed there and worked my way up. But I was a fool for competing with my sister when I should have focused on myself and my work. It was a very stupid decision on my behalf, and I regret it. But it's finished now. After I quit my work, there was a period in which I waited for something to simply fall into my lap. When it didn't happen, I became depressed. It also didn't help that Stacy was excelling in her area, and her business was something my parents always brag about. I despised it, but I couldn't say anything without appearing resentful and jealous. Even though I was feeling both of these emotions, I had to disguise them when I met with my family and seemed to be pleased for Stacy, because anything other than happiness was an inappropriate emotion. That was about the time I met my spouse, Jackson, 25 million. I'm very pleased I did because meeting him transformed my life. It had been roughly 6 months since I had resigned from my work and had been hoping for a better opportunity to come along, but with no success. As I previously stated, I was deeply miserable and disappointed with my life. So I downloaded a dating application. I wasn't really searching for something serious, I just wanted to meet people and use it as a way to distract myself from how horrible things were going for me. I was trying to pay rent and buy basics for myself. I had to rely on my parents for money. They'd send me money every month. I also had some money saved from when I was working, but it wasn't enough, and I was struggling to pay my bills. My parents would bail me out, and I would promise them every month that I would return all of their money as soon as I could. I could always sense displeasure in their tones, which drove me insane because I knew I wasn't doing my best. It was really difficult for me to accept the fact that, at the time, Stacy was faring better than I was, and I was a tremendous disappointment to my parents. So I was utilizing dating apps and going on random dates with men I didn't even like, all to distract myself from my feelings. For a while, it worked. I went on a few dates over the course of many weeks with individuals who were solely interested in hooking up. It was basically casual. However, that changed after I paired with Jackson. He was an extremely interesting guy to talk to at first, and he checked all of my boxes. He had also received straight A's in school. But after graduating from high school, he attended culinary school and was working in a restaurant when we met 2 years ago. He was humorous, engaging, and had the perfect amount of machismo. But at the time, I assured him I wasn't seeking something serious. When he asked me out on a date after nearly 2 weeks of talking online, he said he was seeking something serious and did not want to be in a casual relationship. He was dating to marry. I appreciated how honest and open he was about his feelings, so I decided to give it a shot, not knowing what was in store for me. I went out with him after agreeing on a first date to see how things went. And it went extremely nicely. It felt like we'd known each other for years. I think it was the best date I've ever had. We had a great time, and with him, I didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything. That was the first time I'd ever felt that way around other people, so it was a refreshing change. Our talk flowed easily, and we just clicked. I'm not sure what changed, but I decided to give our relationship a proper shot. We went on several more dates. But after only 3 months together, I discovered that I was pregnant. At the time, All I was concerned about was how Jackson would react to it. Within the first few weeks of our relationship, he had learned almost everything he needed to know about me. I had told him everything about myself and my family, including how I had spent my entire childhood competing with and trying to outdo my sister. But being with him inspired me to be a better person, a person of my own. He already knew everything about me, and I believe I knew everything about him at that moment. In reality, he was the one who pushed me to get out of my depressive state and actively seek a job rather than waiting for something to come to me. So I ended up returning to my previous position at the company from which I had resigned. And I believe that was one of the best moves I've ever made. By the time I discovered I was pregnant, I had been working for over a month and things with Jackson were going well. I was just concerned about his reaction to the news. Most people would believe it was too soon and withdraw from the relationship because they were terrified. But deep inside, I genuinely wanted the baby. It simply felt perfect. I can't put it into words, but I just felt prepared to be a mother. To my surprise, when I told Jackson about my pregnancy, he was very supportive. He informed me that it was my body, therefore I could do anything I wanted, and that he would support me regardless of what I did. When I told him I wanted to keep the kid, no one was happier than him. He explained that he had wanted me to keep the baby because he believed he was also ready. Even though we were young and had only been together for 3 months, he told me he didn't want to seem insane or come across as overly powerful, so he left it up to me. But my decision had made him the happiest guy alive. We agreed that despite the fact that we were expecting a kid, we would wait to get to know each other better before marrying. It was decided. We pushed ahead with the pregnancy, and a few weeks later, we discovered that we were having twins. That was another huge surprise, but we dealt with it. He moved in with me soon after we learned about the pregnancy and introduced me to his parents around the same time. His parents were quite lovely, and they appeared to love all of their children equally, without ever pressuring them to compete with one another. It appeared to be a healthy family, and it was the first time I had seen how one worked because I had never experienced it firsthand. However, I was hesitant to introduce him to my family because I knew my parents wouldn't approve of my life choices. I was a talented student with a promising future, but I had opted to have children with a man I had only known for less than a year. I'd even moved in with him. Any parent would disapprove of this, and I knew my parents would probably lose their minds. So I kept putting it off until I started to show, at which point I realized there was no way to hide it. I organized a meeting with them when I was 4 months pregnant and decided to tell them everything. I invited them over to my house and had Jackson present for moral support. They knew I had been dating Jackson for a time, but they had no idea I had been living with him, or that I would soon be the mother of his children. When I informed them about it, I anticipated them to get angry and yell at me, but they responded in an unexpected way. They truly appeared to be delighted for me. They were overjoyed and hugged me, congratulating me on my pregnancy. And when I informed them I was having twins, my mother nearly collapsed with joy. It was an unexpected reaction, but I was relieved that they were not upset with me. In fact, once they found out, they threw me a party and proclaimed to everyone that they were about to become grandparents. I also informed them that Jackson and I did not want to marry solely because we were having children together. We wanted to live together for a while before making such a significant commitment. They were cool with it as well. They were incredibly supportive of everything, which surprised me, but in a positive way. I was really relieved that my parents were on my side in this, since I would have despised it if they had turned against me or attempted to change my mind about things. I even spoke with them about how supportive they were, and I stated that I had not expected that from them. They told me that they were aware that they had never truly been excellent parents since they had never stopped my sister and me from competing with one another throughout our childhood. They felt they were doing something nice. They believed that continually pushing us to achieve better would help us succeed. However, they understood that doing so may have harmed us in the long run. This epiphany occurred when they discovered that I had quit my work in order to pursue a better opportunity. They recognized that Stacy's success with her own business had influenced her decision. They realized that I wanted to accomplish something on my own to outdo Stacy. I thought it was strange that they knew about it, even though I had never mentioned it to them. However, they stated that as parents, they were aware of what was going on and felt responsible for it. They wanted me to know that whatever happened, they would be there for me. I didn't have to continually compete with Stacy to prove that I deserved their love and affection. They would always adore me, and they were equally proud of both of us because we had always given our all. That was the most important thing to them. It was a much-needed chat, and I'm glad I talked it out with my folks. It made things much simpler for me during the pregnancy and afterwards because I could openly ask my parents to help me with the kids while Jackson and I worked. They also informed me that they had a similar interaction with Stacy. However, it appears that things did not proceed as planned. She had just smiled and said she didn't need them to say such things because she truly thought I was a sore loser. In her opinion, I was having a breakdown, which is why my parents tried to be understanding by telling us that they were equally proud of both of us. But she understood the truth, and refused to believe that our parents were truly attempting to turn a new leaf and become better parents. She was persuaded that she was more deserving of their love since, by her own standards, she was performing better in life. My parents assured me that they would speak with her again when she returned for the holidays, because internet discussions were not the same. They promised me that they would have the same chat with her as they had with me, and she would finally stop trying to compete with me. Until that time, she had gone to great lengths to make me feel horrible. Since I revealed my pregnancy, she has been sending me backhanded compliments and making sarcastic remarks in the family group chat, completely inappropriate. She was clearly attempting to tear me down and make me feel awful about the pregnancy, even though I saw no reason to feel bad about it. To her, however, it was clearly a failure, a massive one. In her eyes, I was knocked up before marriage and living with a guy I had hardly met. So, for her, this was a big win. She assumed she could now say whatever she wanted to me without repercussions. It was really grating on my nerves, and I had considered leaving the group chat multiple times. But my parents persuaded me to stay since they were genuinely trying to be better parents and wanted us to stick together. So I stayed, for their sake. My parents pledged to put an end to this, or at least do their best. And if they couldn't, I could leave the group. When Stacy returned for Christmas, my parents informed me they were going to talk to her, and they did. Unfortunately, she was already too far gone by then. Her main purpose in life at the time was to humiliate me and make me feel as tiny as possible. She was intolerable that year. Even though she had been extremely unpleasant in the previous few years due to her thriving business, that year was far worse. Not only had she just returned from Japan, but she was also aware that I was pregnant and nowhere near her level of accomplishment and riches. She used every chance to remind everyone of this. She was constantly talking about herself, giving me stares, and even sarcastically asking if I was not happy for her. It was quite awkward and uncomfortable. I had to leave the party early because I was trying so hard not to lose my anger and cry in front of everyone. After the Christmas party, my parents attempted to contact Stacy again in the hopes that she would stop calling. Instead, she stated that she had worked hard to be where she is, and she would not allow me to take that away from her. She stated she had every right to brag about it as she pleased, and I would just have to deal with it. That was when I decided to cut ties with her. I exited the group chat, and my parents agreed that it was for the best. We hadn't communicated for 2 years, and I had no idea what she had been up to. But I recently learned from a couple of my relatives that she had returned from Japan, with a baby. I first heard about it around 4 weeks ago. Apparently, it was a miracle baby, who was just 2 months old. My parents told me that they had had multiple video chats with her before she returned, and they had never detected anything, not even the faintest indication that she was pregnant. She explained that she wanted it to be a surprise for everyone. She stated she had recently become a mother and had married in a secret ceremony only a year before. Now she was ready to discuss it. The timing was nothing short of suspect. Almost everyone in the family thought I was going to marry around the same time. But now, thanks to her, everyone is only talking about her marriage and daughter. She stated that her husband remained in Japan due to a heavy workload and was unable to make it. But she had returned with her daughter because she wanted her family to meet her. I couldn't let something like that bother me since I was getting married and it was meant to be a lovely time. So, even after she returned, I continued to avoid her. Unfortunately, it didn't matter because she managed to spoil my wedding. She showed up on my wedding day unannounced. Just after the ceremony, I noticed her among the guests. I nearly flipped out. But Jackson and my folks helped me relax. Apparently, she had snuck in, and making a disturbance would only play into her hands and make my wedding all about her. As long as she wasn't actively causing problems, we decided to let her stay and deal with it later. I was being married at Jackson's aunt's farmhouse, so security wasn't tight, which is how she got inside. Now I regret not spending enough money on security. If I had, we could have avoided a lot of problems. Throughout her time at the wedding, all she talked about was how fortunate she was to have her miracle baby. And how my children were illegitimate and did not count because I had them before marriage. It was quite insulting. She was saying that to everyone she met while attending my wedding. Later on, numerous visitors approached me and told me about it. I had to grin and let it go since I didn't want to argue with her and ruin my own wedding. It was quite challenging, but I managed to get through it. At one point, I nearly lost it. But, before I could say anything, the police attacked the venue. I had no idea what was happening. They sealed the entrances, and we were locked in within seconds. Then they arrested Stacy. It was really disorienting. A woman was screaming and crying while holding the baby that was meant to be my sister's, saying it was actually hers. After then, everything became a blur: statements, handcuffs, and uncertainty. It was not until much later that we realized what had transpired. The baby had never been Stacy's. Apparently, all of the photos she had shown us were taken from a friend's social media account. She'd photoshopped herself into them, like some sicko. And the worst part? All of the occasions she had met us with the kid, she had been babysitting for her friend. She had been living with a friend since she returned from Japan because she had terminated the lease on her own apartment and was seeking for a new place. So she was babysitting for free. That was why Mom had never invited our parents or relatives to see her. Then, on the day of my wedding, she decided to go too far. She attended my wedding without her friend's permission. She had gotten the baby out while her friend and her friend's husband were sleeping. She then refused to answer any subsequent calls. That's why her friends had to contact the cops and have her detained. Fortunately, she had been constantly discussing my wedding and how she wanted to take me down, so her pals had guessed where she would be. This is how they found her and arrested her. It was really ridiculous. I still can't believe what happened, but it did. My family and I are still fighting to cope with it. Thinking Stacy was a fierce competitor was one thing, but knowing that she was willing to go to such extreme, crazy lengths only to show our parents that she was better than me, that was extremely concerning. She is now pleading with her friends not to bring charges against her because she is well aware that she would not win this case. If charges are filed, she will face jail time. So far, nothing has happened, yet she blames me for everything. She thinks I was simply getting married to rub it in her face. Now, don't forget that I haven't spoken to her in almost 2 years. I haven't spoken to her since our previous conversation. And I was even polite enough to let her crash my wedding because I didn't want to cause a scene or shame her. She was the one who transformed my wedding into something nasty. If anything, I should be blaming her. So, when she contacted me yesterday and told me that I needed to convince her friends that I had pushed her to do something crazy, I told her precisely what I believed. I told her that I wished she would wind up in prison, because that is where she belongs. Either that or the psych facility, as she is mad. My parents, however, believe that I must assist her at this time. They want me to persuade her friends that she wasn't thinking straight, because I was tormenting her with news of my marriage and children. That way, they may not file charges against her and have her detained. So far, the matter has become slightly more problematic because she had been living with them and babysitting the infant. The police have yet to figure out what to do about it. They cannot proceed without her friend's permission. It would have been a clear case of kidnapping if she hadn't been living with them and actively caring for their infant while they were away. But that is not the situation here. That is why she has managed to stay out of jail, for the time being. She continued insisting that they had already agreed to her take the kid with her anytime she wanted. But there's no way to corroborate it yet, so she's not in big trouble. All we need to do is persuade them not to file charges. But I am not sure I want to do it. I don't believe she deserves any assistance from me, of all people. But my parents believe it would be bad of me to turn my back on her. So, am I a bad person for wanting my sister to go to jail? Update 1. Okay, I've chosen to cut connections with my entire family, including my parents. Yes, they were quite useful during my pregnancy and after the baby, but I'm done with them now. I believe I will require some time alone. Whether they are supportive or not is irrelevant to me right now. I simply want to be with my husband and children. Period. And I can't do it if I continue to get caught up in their drama. So I'm withdrawing myself from the issue since it's causing me mental distress. I am grateful to my parents for everything they did once I revealed my pregnancy. But really? I am so tired of everything. As for Stacy, I think it's clear why I don't want to aid her. She does not deserve my help. She dug her own grave so she could get out on her own. Jackson thinks I'm making the proper decision. Yes, that's it. Update 2. So, I recently heard from a couple of my family that Stacy is in serious difficulty. Her pals have officially chosen to seek charges and take this thing further. So far, Stacy has claimed that she has her friend's permission to take the kid whenever she wants. But that will be extremely tough to show in court. Given her behavior during the wedding and how she had been claiming the child as her own, I can't see how she can get out of this. It's upsetting, but really? I cannot say I am surprised. I'm also not speaking with my folks right now. And I don't think I will until they admit that what I did was correct, and that they apologize for asking me to help her. That's a lot to ask, but I don't want to speak with them until they understand how terribly they messed things up for Stacy and me as children. They must acknowledge that this is partly their fault. Update 3. Hi, so, Stacy is now on trial. We don't know what will happen to her yet, but if she is convicted, she may face up to 5 years in jail. She is mentally unstable, which could result in a lower sentence. Anyway, that isn't our business. Jackson and I are still going on our honeymoon. We're going to try to make amends for our horrible wedding. I can't ask my parents to babysit because we still don't communicate. So we'll have to ask Jackson's parents to watch our kids while we're gone. But it'll just be for 2 weeks, so it's not too long. I'm simply hoping my honeymoon is better than my wedding. And honestly, I have a feeling it will happen. Because this time, it will be just me and Jackson. My mother wanted me to cancel my wedding to avoid hurting my sister, who was abandoned before hers. I refused and didn't invite them. I'm a 30-year-old woman, correct? And I've been quite excited because I'm arranging my wedding with my boyfriend, who is now my fiancé. We've been preparing this big day for almost a year, and we wanted to make sure we had everything booked well ahead of time. Why? Because we chose a specific date in December for our wedding, and it falls right in the heart of the Christmas season, when everything gets really hectic. Here's where things become tough. My mother isn't exactly delighted with my wedding preparations. Why? My sister was set to marry a few months ago, but her fiancé abandoned her right before the altar, which is kind of terrible. Yes, there was a massive mess, and she was really upset. My mother believes that holding a wedding so soon after the accident will be extremely difficult for my sister and may hurt her sentiments. First and foremost, my wedding isn't particularly fancy or extravagant. My fiancé and I prefer to keep things simple. We don't overspend on things we don't need. Our wedding is not too expensive. We're only inviting roughly 50 guests, including our closest friends and family. We are not throwing a big pre-wedding celebration or a wild bachelorette bash. It is simply just the wedding ceremony followed by a pleasant, modest meal. Another factor is that my fiancé and I planned our wedding long before my sister considered getting married again. We didn't make this decision on a whim. Everyone in the family, even my mother and sister, knew what we were going for in December. So we're not being insensitive or anything. But, for some reason, just as things appeared to be going smoothly, my mother and sister decided to make a huge issue about it. It's very frustrating because it appears that they're turning this pleasant occasion into a drama. My sister is 3 years older than I, and this would have been her second marriage. Her first relationship ended very calmly. They simply drifted apart after 2 years and chose to split. She has been single since then. So, last Christmas, just when everything was bright and merry, my fiancé proposed to me, and it was beautiful. We had planned a summer wedding, but my fiancé was assigned a short-term trip overseas, so we had to postpone our preparations until December. Since then, we've been planning it in stages. I hate to admit it, but I believe my sister hastened into a second marriage because of me. When we announced our wedding last year, she had only recently begun dating him. They hadn't planned a wedding yet, but I found out a few weeks later that they were getting married. It sounded odd to me, marrying someone after only a few months of knowing them. Out of concern, I asked her whether she was sure about this guy, because marriage is a major deal for me. She became defensive, claiming that not everyone is capable of developing a lasting relationship. It was a really snarky comment, but I let it go. She's never had a steady relationship. I believe the longest relationship she had lasted a year, with the man she married first and then divorced after 2 years. I'm not saying that a year isn't enough time to get to know your partner, but after a broken marriage, one should proceed with caution. She had only known this guy for about 5 or 6 months, but she was ready for another wedding. Anyway, that was her decision, and I respected it and did not intervene further. They had planned an intimate church wedding with only a few guests. I believe it was less than 20. There were just 3 persons from the groom's side on the guest list. He said that his parents resided in a foreign nation and would be unable to attend on such short notice. So, from his perspective, there were 2 buddies and 1 colleague. I believe it was his manager. Nevertheless, I am not certain. However, none of them, including the groom, attended the wedding. We remained waiting at the church. My sister and dad repeatedly called him, but he did not show up. Later, he texted her and said he couldn't marry her since he wasn't sure yet. My sister tried to calm him down and advised that they continue their relationship and then decide on marriage. But he ignored her. That dude was in his early 20s, less than 25. Again, I'm not generalizing, but you know how the early 20s are, especially for Generation Z. I don't think anyone wants to settle down at this age, especially after only a few months of dating. Since then, my sister has been bitter toward me. No, I did not do any of those "I told you so" things, but I believe she blames me for jeopardizing her plans. Being stood up at your wedding is the worst thing that can happen to anyone, and I consoled her afterwards. She requested to be left alone with her friends and mother. Except for her friends and her mother, I was the only other person in the room. It was amusing though, she might have just asked me to leave. I felt terrible about it, but I left without saying anything. I wasn't feeling well, but I recognized it must be humiliating for her, and she had no idea how to respond. I contacted her after a week to check on her, but she did not answer. I texted, but it was left unread, so I didn't bother again. A few months later, I met her at Mom's house. I asked her how she was doing, and she said, "Why are you treating me as if I'm destitute and abandoned by a man? I don't need a man. I'm happy and complete just being myself." I said, "Sure, I was just checking on you. You see, I'm not making up these assumptions." She wasn't giving me cold shoulders after her wedding was put off. Last week, we sent out wedding invites. My sister called me. I assumed it was to congratulate me, or something. But she was like, "So, you're getting married in this outdoor venue?" I answered, "Yes." She said, "Cool," and then hung up. I was baffled until I received a call from my mother the following evening. She urged me to tone down the wedding since it was upsetting my sister. Toning down means canceling the venue and marrying at a church or at the registrar's office with 36 individuals on both sides. I informed her that we had been planning this for over a year and that she was well aware of the plan. So why would she suddenly have an issue with it? She said that it was because my sister had been standing up at the altar, and it would be inappropriate for me to have such a grandiose wedding within a few months. I told her that we had already paid for the majority of the wedding expenses, including the venue, food, and decorations. Not only had we paid the minimum booking amount, but nearly 60% of it. I tried to make her understand that modifying the plan would result in a tremendous loss. Canceling the venue would result in a significant financial loss for us. All booking fees for the venue, decorations, and caterers are non-refundable. Hearing me moan about the loss, she urged that I cancel the wedding. I was at a loss for words. How could she ask me to cancel the wedding? She stated, "Actually, that is the better way to respect your sister's feelings. She would have enough time to recover from her ordeal." She suggested we move our wedding to next summer. I informed her that we had already postponed it for work reasons and could not do it again. She tried to gaslight me by claiming that if I could do it for my fiancé, I should do it again for my sister if I loved her. This made my blood boil. I assured her that I was not going to cancel anything and that the wedding would proceed as scheduled. She hung up on me. I discussed this with my fiancé, and he believes my sister is overly distraught by her position. It must be difficult for her to believe that everything is okay for me while her life is a shambles. He stated it was fine if I wanted a low-key wedding. Discussing this with my fiancé has made things worse for me because I now believe he is more sympathetic to my sister. It makes me feel like a jerk for not considering her feelings. Until recently, I had thought my mother's request to cancel or modify the wedding preparations was absurd. But now I'm questioning if I should do it. I do not know, guys. Have any of you been in a similar situation? I'd love to have a new take on this. Update 1. Hello everyone, and thank you for participating with me in the comments. It was quite helpful to me. One of the comments, probably many of you, suggested that my mother is narcissistic for asking me to adjust my wedding plans simply because it will harm my sister. I understand you are correct. It was quite cruel. I'm not doing anything to injure my sister. If she truly loved me, she would not feel this way. There's no other way to phrase it. She's wounded because she's jealous of me. That is it. And it is not my problem at all. Some of you inquired about my family dynamics, namely whether my mother has always been as apathetic to me and my sister has always been narcissistic. So, the answer is no. Growing up, I never felt that my mother was biased toward my sister. Obviously, every parent has a favorite child unconsciously, but she never made it clear. Yeah, I used to grumble that mom liked my sister more, but she was never harsh or evil toward me. My sister and I had a fairly regular sibling bond in our early days. However, during our adolescence, we grew apart. It wasn't due to fighting or anything like that, we simply matured into completely different people. She was more homely and spent time with mom and our aunts, making small chat. I was never interested in any of that. Instead of spending time with family members, I concentrated on my schoolwork, applying for scholarships, and socializing with friends. I also moved out really early. When I was 18, I enrolled at a college far from home, and I've been living alone ever since. Meanwhile, my sister lived with my parents until she turned 25. She only moved out once she married her first spouse. Even yet, her husband's house was only a few miles away, so she spent every other weekend at mom's place. Dad died 5 years ago, and since then, my sister has moved back in with mom. So, yes, they have spent a lot more time together than I have. Naturally, Their link is stronger than the one I have with my mother. Nothing much has happened since my last post. Actually, I'm avoiding any talks with them. I'm not going to visit or call them. My fiancé inquired whether I was contemplating my mother's plea to postpone the wedding. I said no. The wedding would go as planned. I'll provide an update if anything changes. Update 2. I hate to admit it, but my sister is a true narcissist, and mom has been supporting her evilness. So, my mother invited my fiancé and myself out to supper. I didn't feel very well about it. Before that invitation, she contacted me to inquire about the wedding preparations. When I gave her updates, I got the impression she wasn't even interested. It was more like, "Are you still doing that?" Then she interrupted me and asked, "Why don't you come home? We can sit and discuss." I was perplexed by the entire sit and talk thing, but she explained that she only meant a general catch-up. I refused to go since I didn't like how she treated me. But last week, she called my fiancé to formally ask us to supper. He asked if she had a special event or anything she wanted to discuss. But she replied there was nothing special, she just wanted to serve us some home-cooked meals. He couldn't refuse, so we had to comply. Before traveling there, I informed my fiancé that if mom or my sister requested that we cancel the wedding, or even make any changes, he should refuse. My fiancé is a soft-spoken gentleman who is easily taken away by the emotions of others. I advised him not to give in to their demands or make any promises. If such a circumstance came, he should remain silent and I would handle it. We went there and, thankfully, my sister wasn't present. Everything was going well until mom began discussing her wedding, how she and dad married at a registrar's office, followed by a simple lunch with both of their parents. She went on to explain how the money helped them set up their home and take care of other crucial matters. Then mom tried to manipulate my fiancé by suggesting that we have a long life ahead of us and shouldn't spend money on the wedding. I informed mom that we had previously planned a very low-cost wedding relative to our means. We both make decent money, but we live a very basic lifestyle. She went on to remark that it is our family tradition to have an intimate wedding because we are humble people who do not believe in bragging. I was like, wait a minute. My sister's first wedding was more than intimate. It had almost 100 attendees. Mom defended it, claiming it was the family's first wedding and dad wanted it that way. That day, I discovered how wicked my mother was. She began sobbing, expressing her gratitude that dad was able to organize and see at least one of his daughter's weddings. She went on about how much she misses him at all family gatherings. My fiancé hugged mom to comfort her. I motioned for him not to be taken away by her weeping. He was a little annoyed by my stiffness. My mother almost convinced him, and he said, "Sure, yeah, we'll take care of it. You don't care about things like that." My sister stepped in just then, and oh my God, her bitterness knows no bounds. She rushed to console mom, telling her that she would always be there for her and that, unlike others, she would respect and follow her decisions. Her snark pushed my buttons so hard that I couldn't hold back. I informed her that I had done nothing wrong, but they were targeting me in such a way. This resulted in a full-blown quarrel between us. She stated I should have canceled my wedding because my sister was going through such a difficult time in life. She accused me of being insensitive because I did not even tone down the pomp and show. She was personally criticizing me, but I said nothing negative. I was simply defending myself. But when she remarked it was ridiculous to spend so much money on one event, I returned it to her. I answered, "Yes, it is just one event. However, it is the most important day of my life. And, unlike others, I intend to have it once in my life." She quickly realized I was referring to her 2 weddings. I understand, it was cruel and mean. But, Guy, I was over her personal insults. For months, they've been calling me selfish and pretentious. I'm done being the good and bigger guy. I'm just finished. Now, I enjoy being the devil. If they actually cared about my happiness, they would not be upset to see me marry. They're just jealous of me. Not to mention that my statement made the situation worse, and my fiancé had to intercede and drag me out of the house. While departing, I exclaimed that the wedding would go forward as scheduled, and if there was a problem, they could skip it. That happened yesterday, and I'm still seething as I write this update. I'll tell you, you can deal with all the injustices in the world, but narcissism from your own family is the most difficult to deal with. Update 3. Thank you, everyone, for your support. I apologize for the rambling in my last update. I was filled with rage and didn't know how to express it. But thank you to everyone who messaged me and commented. That actually calmed me down. Okay, I've got quite an update this time. I am getting married next week, and we are proceeding with our original intentions. That is the good part. A lot has transpired since my last post, but thankfully, I have not lost my resolve. After that severe, I'd call it, fight with my sister and, to a lesser extent, with my mother, I was experiencing a range of emotions, from rage to heartbreak. I didn't communicate with my fiancé for a few days since I wasn't in a state to have a sensible conversation. He intended to make me see something, but all I could think about was how my sister couldn't take seeing me happy, and mom was side with her, completely ignoring my sentiments. My fiancé talked me through it after my fury faded. He proposed that we change the setting to a church and cut down on our family. He believed that my sister was most concerned about the extended family attending the wedding and discussing her shame at the altar. I was compelled to reduce the number of relatives because I was not particularly close to my aunts and uncles. But I truly wanted the venue. Meanwhile, I contacted my cousin, who, to be honest, is more of a gossip monger. I called her to see if my sister had spoken anything about the fight. And indeed, she did. My sister had spread rumors about me everywhere. She claimed that I humiliated and insulted her for her broken relationships. She absolutely exaggerated the entire story. Even if it was only my sister, I could understand. But my mother had also joined her side and had been disparaging me, calling me insensitive and arrogant. When I told my fiancé about this, he instantly got out of it. He was like, "Whatever you decide, I'm not getting into your family drama." So we're sticking with the original plan. A garden-themed wedding with 70 guests, as decided. My sister's narcissism is reaching new heights. She was sobbing in front of my aunts, telling them how insensitive I am and how I am hurting her sentiments by marrying in front of her. Now I don't understand her problem. I'm not marrying her fiancé or husband, why is she making such a fuss over it? I tried to console her. I urged her to feel happy for me. When this technique failed, she began encouraging everyone to boycott my wedding so that I may learn the importance of respecting the feelings of those close to me. When I found out about it, I emailed both of them and told them they were no longer invited to the wedding. I explained how they had been disparaging me and hurting my sentiments. I kept several important family members in the loop, including my godmother, aunt, and her husband, so that everyone knew my side of the tale. Following that email, I noticed the tables turning. I received multiple phone calls from various family members, including my godmother, assuring me that nothing was wrong. I have the right to have the wedding I want. Reservations were made months before, and everyone was aware of the arrangements well in advance. So what my mother and sister were doing was purely terrible. I have every right to exclude them from my wedding. My sister left me a lengthy voicemail, calling me a spoiled brat and arrogant for not respecting her feelings. She stated it was quite tough for her to move on. She had been abandoned by her fiancé during her wedding only a few months prior. Instead of comforting her, I was busy planning my own wedding and clawing her wounds. Then she cursed me. She predicted that I would face a similar fate, or worse. She claimed that my fiancé, or future husband, would leave me or cheat on me with other women. Only then, she explained, would I understand her anguish. All along, I had been supporting myself. I was firm about my decision. But hearing that crushed my heart. I couldn't believe my own sister could curse me like way, only a week before my wedding. The week leading up to the wedding is already an emotional roller coaster for any woman. And hearing this from my own older sister is the worst thing. People bless their siblings and children at weddings. But I am being cursed. I'm not sure what I did to earn this hate. My mother also replied to my email. She claimed she was disowning me. She advised me not to see her again since I didn't care about my family's feelings. This is how things stand so far. If anything more happens, I will provide an update on this topic. Otherwise, send me well wishes for the future. Update 4. Hello again, everyone. I'm here with another update on my wedding story. And what a whirlwind these past few weeks have been. I genuinely appreciate all of your help and guidance. It's been a huge support during these tough times. Following my last update, things took an unexpected turn. With the wedding just days away, my fiancé and I were determined to go ahead with our plans despite the constant family upheaval. Life, as they say, is what happens while you're busy making other plans. 2 days ago, my mother called me. I was afraid to respond, fearing additional requests or comments. But something in her speech took me off guard. It was remorse, which I had not heard from her in a long time. She asked if we might meet for coffee, just the two of us. Against my better judgment I consented, curious to hear what she had to say. We met in a quiet cafe, distant from the recollections of home. My mother, with tears in her eyes, handed me a letter. It came from my sister. In the letter, my sister admitted to being overcome by her own grief. She stated that her actions toward me were unjustified and motivated by her anguish. She apologized for the upheaval she caused and emphasized her desire for my happiness, even if she was still unable to attend the wedding. Then my mother spoke. She apologized for her involvement in everything. She revealed that her grief over my sister's aborted wedding and the death of my father years before had impaired her judgment. She told me she loved me and regretted asking me to cancel my wedding. While she couldn't change the past, she wanted to make amends and begged to be a part of my big day. I was stunned. The earnestness in their statements was evident, and it gave me something to think about. I spent the night discussing everything with my fiancé, who was supportive of any decision I made. After careful consideration, I decided to extend an olive branch. I called my sister and mother and told them they may attend the wedding if they felt like it. My sister, still overcome with grief, stated she wasn't prepared to attend. However, she thanked me and wished me a wonderful day. My mother, on the other hand, was grateful and vowed to respect our plans and support us on our special day. Everything is set for the wedding. We're sticking to our original plan, a garden-themed wedding for our closest friends and family. It feels good to move forward. Not only will we celebrate our love, but we will also take steps to mend our family. Thank you again for your words of support and wisdom. I'll make sure to keep you updated after the wedding, wishing us luck and bright skies. Update 5. Hello everyone, I'm back with what I think will be the most joyous update in this entire tale. Our wedding day has come and gone, and it was a celebration that not only represented the start of a new chapter with my husband, but also the mending of old scars in my family. Thank you all for your nice thoughts and useful advice along the process. Our wedding day began bright and clear, a wonderful December morning, with a sharp cold in the air, promising a lovely winter wedding. The garden site was converted into a magnificent setting with white and gold decorations, shimmering fairy lights draped around the trees, and brilliant winter flowers that provided a pop of color against the tranquil white backdrop. The wedding was small and intimate, attended by roughly 70 of our closest friends and family. As I walked down the aisle, my fiancé's face was filled with genuine love and excitement, which I will cherish for the rest of my life. Our vows were genuine and emotional, reflecting our journey together and the future we envisage. Throughout the exchange, there was hardly a dry eye. Even my usually reserved fiancé shed a few tears. Suddenly, midway through the reception, my mother took the microphone. My heart skipped a beat, expecting the reappearance of old frustrations. However, what followed was a genuine speech from her, in which she acknowledged previous mistakes and expressed her joy for us. She shared anecdotes from my childhood, which elicited gentle laughter from the audience. She ended by expressing how proud my father would have been to see this day. It was a significant healing experience for all of us. Later in the evening, the dance floor was open, and the atmosphere was charged with excitement. I danced with my mother, which I had not thought was possible a few months ago. We didn't say much, and we didn't need to. The dance conveyed it all. My friends and family mingled, danced, and celebrated, forming new happy memories. Although my sister was not present, her presence was felt through the beautiful bouquet she sent, along with a heartfelt message. I kept the flower near the family photos we exhibited to symbolize her role in the day. It was a heartbreaking reminder that healing takes time, and everyone's journey is unique. The reception offered a cozy, tasty winter-themed meal with comfort dishes that warmed everyone despite the cold weather. Our caterer did an excellent job presenting seasonal dishes, and the warm apple cider was a big success with the guests. As the evening came to a close, we launched lanterns into the sky, symbolizing the release of old grievances and the illumination of new aspirations and dreams. Watching them sail up into the starry sky, accompanied by cheers from our loved ones, was a magical way to close a wonderful day. Now, as we get back into our routine and think about our wedding, I'm filled with gratitude. This occasion was more than just the wedding of two people. It was about the reconciliation and healing of a family ripped apart by misunderstanding and pain. Moving forward, I wish to mend relationships and create a future filled with love and understanding. Thank you everyone again for your support and for keeping up with my posts. Your ideas and support have been a guiding light throughout difficult times, and I'm grateful for our group. As we travel on our honeymoon and future experiences, I carry not just my husband's affection, but also fresh relationships with my family. Here's to new beginnings, full of hope and excitement. Looked down on by my parents, I left to pursue art. When I shared my first project, my mom coldly asked, "When will you get a real job?" I, 25F, have always been the black sheep in my family. Emma, 28F, my older sister, has been the golden child since I can remember. Our parents, particularly our mother, have always favored her over me. It's been this way since we were children, and it's just gotten worse as we've grown up. Growing up, Emma was always the excellent student, the popular girl, and the one who excelled at everything she did. She captained the cheerleading squad, received all A's, and was even voted prom queen. Meanwhile, I struggled in school, had a narrow circle of friends, and preferred to spend time in the art room rather than attending social activities. Our parents never missed an opportunity to compare us. "Why can't you be more like Emma?" was a remark I heard far too frequently. They'd constantly praise her successes while scarcely mentioning mine. When I get a B on an exam, they'd wonder why it wasn't an A. When Emma received an A, they would throw a celebratory supper. This tendency persisted into our adult life. Emma attended an Ivy League college on scholarship, whereas I attended a state school to study art. Our parents were happy with Emma's choice but wary of mine. They continuously questioned my decision, asking if I was confident I could earn a life as an artist. I remember the day I told them about my college decision. We were sitting at the dinner table, and I had spent weeks working up the guts to announce my choice. When I eventually told them, my father's face plummeted and my mother looked like she was going to cry. Emma, of course, chipped in. "Are you sure that's a good idea? Art school isn't exactly known for job security." My parents agreed, and I felt my hopes crumble in front of my eyes. Despite their displeasure, I persisted with my decision. Those 4 years of college were among the best of my life. I finally felt like I belonged, surrounded by people who understood and valued creativity. I excelled in my academics, making the dean's list multiple times. However, when I shared these accomplishments with my family, they were met with lukewarm reception. "That's nice, dear," my mother would remark, immediately shifting the conversation to Emma's latest accomplishment. Emma secured a high-paying position at a famous law firm in the city following graduation. In contrast, I had difficulty finding my foothold. I worked several part-time jobs while attempting to establish myself as a freelance illustrator. Our parents were always interested in hearing about Emma's newest case or advancement, but when I mentioned my creative efforts, they shifted the subject. I recall a very unpleasant family meal around 6 months after graduation. Emma was visiting from the city, and our parents had cooked her favorite dish. The entire talk concentrated upon her recent court victory. My mother continued emphasizing how proud she was, and my father could not stop smiling. When I tried to tell my mom about a tiny drawing I had gotten for a local magazine, she interrupted me mid-sentence to ask Emma about her intentions to buy an apartment. The situation at home had become terrible. I was still living with our parents to save money, but the continual comparisons and subtle criticism were having a negative impact on my mental health. Emma had her own apartment in the city, paid for by our parents. Every time she came, it felt like a royal arrival. Our parents would spend days getting ready, cleaning the house, and cooking her favorite foods. When she walked in, everyone greeted her with embraces and joyful talk. In contrast, my presence was frequently treated as an afterthought. I attempted to tell them how I felt multiple times, but it never went well. They'd accuse me of jealousy over Emma's achievement or say I was overly sensitive. "We just want what's best for you," they'd say, which always sounded like, "We want you to be more like Emma." My entire life was impacted by the continuous comparisons. I began to question my decisions, abilities, and even my worth as a person. I couldn't get out of bed some days because I was overcome with emotions of inadequacy and failure. I began to retreat from my friends, feeling humiliated by my lack of achievement in comparison to my sister. Their criticism extended to my romantic relationships as well. My parents were unimpressed when I brought home my first serious boyfriend in college, who was also an art student. They spent the entire dinner questioning him about his future prospects and making thinly veiled remarks about the volatility of artistic careers. Meanwhile, when Emma returned home with her boyfriend, a law student from an affluent family, my parents almost pulled out the red carpet. Things came to a head last week. I had finally secured a large illustration commission for a children's book series. It wasn't a large salary, but it was a step in the right direction for me professionally. I was looking forward to sharing the news with my family at supper. As usual, the discourse focused on Emma's most recent accomplishments. She had recently won a major case at work and was being considered for a promotion. Our parents could not stop talking about how proud they were. When there was a lull in the discourse, I seized the opportunity. I told them about my illustration project, trying not to become too excited. My mother's response: "That's nice, dear, but don't you think it's time you got a real job? You're not getting any younger, you know." My father only nodded in agreement. I was crushed. I tried to explain that this was a legitimate position that may lead to other opportunities in the future, but they wouldn't listen. Emma stepped in, suggesting she could definitely find me an entry-level work at her law firm if I wanted a steady job. That was the final straw. I rose up, my chair grinding loudly on the floor. I told them I was weary of being regarded like a disappointment, and that I was proud of my work and decisions. I said I couldn't live in a home where I was continuously made to feel inferior. My parents looked stunned. My mother began to say something about how I was being unduly sensitive, but I interrupted her. I informed them that I was moving out. That I'd rather struggle on my own than deal with their incessant criticism. Emma tried to be a peacemaker by advising me to calm down and not make rash judgments. But I could see a smug expression in her eyes. She was loving it, being the ideal daughter while I was the family disappointment. I stormed up to my room and began packing. My parents and Emma followed, attempting to talk me out of it, but their comments only reaffirmed what I already knew. They considered me as a failure and a burden. My mother even had the audacity to remark, "If you leave now, don't expect us to help you when you can't make rent." As I stuffed items into a suitcase, memories flooded my head. When I won a local art competition in high school, my parents didn't attend the award ceremony since it coincided with one of Emma's debating competitions. The numerous times they'd introduced Emma as our daughter, the lawyer, and me as simply our other daughter. They looked disappointed when I picked art school over the business program they wanted me to attend. That night, I fled with whatever I could put into my car. As I drove away, I noticed my parents and Emma standing in the doorway. My mother was crying. My father appeared angry. And Emma only looked smug. I felt a variety of feelings, including sadness, rage, and fear. There is also an odd sensation of relief. I'm currently staying with a friend while I decide out my future move. I knew leaving was a bold step, but I couldn't handle it anymore. Am I overreacting? Should I have stayed and attempted to help them understand? Or was quitting the correct decision? I feel lost and alone, but also relieved to be free of that harmful surroundings. The prospect of creating a life on my own terms is both thrilling and terrifying. I'm concerned about my financial situation, but I'm also excited to pursue my art without the constant criticism and comparisons. Any advice or help would be greatly appreciated. How do I proceed from here? How can I create a life for myself while dealing with the emotional consequences of leaving my family? And, most importantly, how can I start believing in myself after years of being told I'm not good enough? Update 1. It's been over 2 months since I left my parents' house, and a lot has happened. I wanted to give you all an update and thank you for your encouragement and ideas. Your warm words and encouragement have become a lifeline during this difficult time. After I departed, I spent a week sleeping on a friend's couch while I searched for a more permanent option. It was difficult, but I was able to find a little studio apartment that I could just barely afford with my savings and the proceeds from my illustration project. It's not much, but it is mine. And for the first time in my life, I believe I have my own space. The first several weeks were difficult. I pushed myself into my work, determined to show to myself, and perhaps to my family, that I could succeed on my own. I took on a part-time job at a neighborhood coffee shop to augment my income from illustration employment. Between the two jobs, I was working virtually constantly, but it felt fantastic to be self-sustaining. There were times when I came home fatigued, my hands aching from hours of drawing and pouring lattes, and I wondered if I had made the right decision. The small voice in my head, which sounded eerily like my mother, would tell me that I was dumb for believing I could make it as an artist. But then I'd look at the illustrations I was working on and recall why I'd chosen this path. My parents tried to contact me multiple times, but I was not ready to speak with them. I needed time to comprehend things and focus on getting on my own 2 feet. Their voicemails ranged from violent demands that I return home to emotional pleas wondering whether I was all right. It was difficult to ignore them, but I knew I needed time to think things out for myself. Emma also called several times, always in the same patronizing tone, telling me I was acting childishly and that I should come home and apologize. Her words wounded, but they also fueled my will to succeed on my own terms. About a month after I departed, something unexpected occurred. The children's book I illustrated was released, and it began to gain traction. The author shared it on social media, and it piqued the interest of a few prominent parenting bloggers. Suddenly, I began receiving emails from publishers interested in my work. I recall sitting in my tiny apartment, staring at my computer screen in disbelief as the emails arrived. For the first time, I felt as if my dreams were more than just that. I sobbed that night, but they were tears of happiness and relief. I got 2 additional book deals in quick succession. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to allow me to leave my coffee shop job and pursue illustration full-time. For the first time, I felt as though my career was taking off. This newfound achievement provided a lift in confidence. I began to believe in myself and my abilities in a manner I had never done before. I learned I didn't need my family's approval to legitimize my decisions or my worth. Emma unexpectedly arrived at my residence about this time. She stated she was concerned about me and that our parents were furious. I invited her in, more out of courtesy than anything else. At first, she was genuinely interested in how I was doing. She looked about my small apartment and inquired about my job. I showed her the published book and informed her of the new projects. For a brief time, I wondered whether she now saw me as an equal. But then she started using the same old rhetoric. She stated that, while it was good that I had some success, it was not a steady career. She mentioned how scared our parents were, and how they only wanted what was best for me. She also mentioned, again, that she could find me a position at her law firm. As she spoke, I felt a familiar sense of inadequacy seeping in. Something was different this time, though. I felt a sense of accomplishment as I looked at my work on my desk and considered the emails from publishers in my inbox. I lost my patience. I told her everything was good and that I was happier than I had ever been. I pointed out that, for the first time, I was fully reliant on my own efforts, with no assistance from our parents. I questioned if she could say the same, given that our parents were still paying for her apartment. Emma's face transformed. The veneer of concern fell away, revealing the same arrogant, superior grin I had seen the night I left. She snapped at me, calling me ungrateful and selfish. She told me that I was breaking our parents' hearts and should be ashamed of myself. I asked her to go. As she was leaving, she turned and said, "Don't come crying to us if this little art phase of yours fails. We won't be there to bail you out." After she went, I felt both terrified and strangely empowered. I realized I no longer needed their approval. I was succeeding on my own, doing what I like, and that was enough. The interaction with Emma prompted me to think on our friendship over the years. I remembered how close we were as kids, before competition and comparisons drove us away. I felt a twinge of grief for the sisterhood we had lost. However, I knew that I couldn't keep holding on to that romanticized vision of our relationship. In the weeks that followed, I refocused on my work. I began connecting with other painters and illustrators, forming a network of like-minded creatives. For the first time, I felt as if I belonged to a group that understood and valued me. I also began therapy to work through the years of emotional baggage I had been carrying. It's been difficult, but it's helped me realize my worth beyond my family's expectations or my professional achievement. I'm still not ready to speak with my parents, but I feel stronger now. I'm focusing on my work and creating a life that makes me happy. It isn't always easy, but it's worthwhile. There are still days when I doubt myself and miss my family, despite everything. But then I look at what I've accomplished in 2 months on my own and I'm proud. I'm learning to be my own cheerleader, celebrating my accomplishments without the need for affirmation from others. Thank you again for your support. It means more than you realize. To anyone else going through similar difficulties, please know that you are not alone. It is acceptable to pick yourself, pursue your interests, and define success on your own terms. Update 2. It's been about a year since my previous update, and I can't believe how much has changed. I'd want to convey what has happened and thank you all again for your ongoing support during this trip. My illustration career has taken off. The children's book series on which I worked proved to be fairly successful, and I've subsequently illustrated several more volumes. I've recently started accepting commissions for magazine covers and a few advertising campaigns. It has been a lot of effort, but I am enjoying every minute of it. About 6 months ago, I moved into a bigger apartment. It's still not large, but it has enough room for a real art studio. Being able to divide my work and residential rooms has greatly improved my productivity and mental health. The day I moved in, standing in the midst of my studio, surrounded by blank canvases and the scent of fresh paint, I felt a sense of success and possibilities that I had never known. My confidence has increased alongside my career. I've been asked to talk at a few local schools about jobs in illustration, and I've even begun mentoring a few young artists. It feels weird to be able to inspire people when not long ago, I was questioning my own decisions. Now onto the familial drama. A few months after my last post, my mother phoned me unexpectedly. She cried and asked if we could meet. I was skeptical, but eventually agreed to meet her for coffee. My therapist had been encouraging me to set boundaries and concentrate on rebuilding my connection with my family, so I saw this as a chance to begin the process. When we met, she appeared fatigued and angry. She began by apologizing for the way they had treated me. She stated that after I departed, they had plenty of time to think on their behavior. She admitted that they had treated me unfairly and regretted constantly comparing me to Emma. Her words were exactly what I had hoped to hear for years. But I felt conflicted. Part of me wanted to accept her apology and run into her arms like a small kid. Another part of me was skeptical, wondering whether this was again another attempt to force me to conform to their expectations. She then revealed a bombshell. Emma was sacked from her position at the legal firm. Apparently, she was misrepresenting her billable hours and overcharging customers. The company found out and fired her right away. I was shocked. The golden child, the ideal daughter, had fallen from grace. I felt a range of feelings, including surprise, perverse delight, and, weirdly, concern for my sister. But that was not all. Emma had been living way beyond her means, relying on our parents to cover her expenses. When she lost her employment, she struggled to meet her costs. She had accumulated a large amount of credit card debt and was facing eviction from her residence. My parents tried to help her, but the situation was severe. They had already exhausted a large chunk of their savings attempting to keep Emma afloat. My mother broke down as she told me this, stating they felt deceived and had no idea what to do. As I listened to my mother, I realized how much pressure Emma must have felt all these years. Always needing to be flawless, always trying to meet our parents' expectations. In a way, I felt bad for her. My mother asked if I would consider coming home for dinner to discuss matters as a family. I felt conflicted, but I consented. I felt emotionally stronger and more capable of dealing with it now. The family supper was strained. Emma was there, and she didn't look like the polished, confident lady I recalled. She was protective and angry, lashing out at everybody. She claimed that our parents did not provide adequate support for her and that I had abandoned the family. I remained cool and stood firm. I informed them about my accomplishments, how I had established a job and a life for myself without their assistance. Our parents listened with expressions of pride and remorse on their faces. Emma rushed out midway through dinner. My parents were devastated when she departed. They apologized again for how they had treated me and expressed their pride in my accomplishments. They asked if I'd consider returning home. I told them that while I appreciated their apology, I was not interested in returning. I had created a life for myself and was content with it. However, I expressed my willingness to improve on our relationship and spend more time together. Since then, things have progressively improved. My parents and I now chat on a daily basis, and they have even paid me a visit in my new apartment. They inquire about my job and are genuinely interested. It's unusual to have them genuinely listen to me and be proud of my accomplishments. Emma, on the other hand, has cut off communication with all of us. Last I heard, she had relocated to another place to start afresh. I've tried contacting her several times, but she has not responded. I hope she's doing well and can discover her own path, free of the strain of being the perfect child. The entire experience has taught me a lot. I've learned about family relationships, self-worth, and the value of pursuing your own path. I've understood that success isn't about meeting others' expectations, but about being true to yourself and doing what makes you happy. I've also learned the importance of forgiving. It has not been easy, but I am working on forgiving my parents and Emma, not for their sakes, but for my own peace of mind. I've discovered that harboring hatred and resentment only harms me in the long run. My relationship with my parents is still in process. Sometimes old tendencies emerge, and I have to remind them, and myself, that things have changed. However, we are making progress in the right way. They are beginning to respect me for who I am, rather than who they wanted me to be. What about my career? It continues to thrive. I was just requested to illustrate a comic novel, which is a dream come true. I'm also thinking about teaching a course at a nearby community college, sharing my knowledge and experiences with those who are interested in art. Looking back over the last year, I'm shocked at how much has changed. There were times when I questioned myself, wondering if I'd made the correct decision in leaving. However, I now see it was the smartest decision I could have done. It forced me to stand on my own 2 feet and believe in myself when no one else would. Stay strong if you're dealing with comparable familial troubles. Stand up for yourself. Follow your passions. Also, don't let someone make you feel less than you are. You never know how things will turn out. Success and happiness can take many shapes, and the path to achieving them isn't always the one chosen for you. Family dynamics can be complex, and healing takes time. Be patient with yourself and others. Set limits as needed, but be willing to reconcile if it feels right. Most importantly, remember this. You are valuable, regardless of your family's approval or anyone else's expectations. I'm grateful for this community and the encouragement you've given me during this journey. Your encouragement has meant more than you realize. Thank you for being there for me during the difficult times, and for celebrating my wins alongside me. I'm looking forward to what the future holds. I feel like I'm finally living life on my own terms, pursuing my passions and developing important relationships. It isn't always easy, but it's genuine and rewarding in a manner I've never felt before. Thank you all again for your unwavering support throughout this journey. It means everything to me. Here's to pursuing our aspirations, healing old hurts, and creating the life we want. Falsely accused by my ex, I lost everything. Expelled and isolated, I fled, changed my name, and rebuilt my life in a foreign country. My ex-girlfriend cheated on me. When I discovered out and confronted her, she panicked and told practically everyone we knew that I had raped her in order to cover up her infidelity. I was detained during the investigation but was freed owing to a lack of proof. My parents had already shunned me, and the majority of my friends had withdrawn themselves. My parents believed I was a rapist who had just gotten lucky, even though I hadn't been proven innocent by a jury yet. My best friend discreetly assisted me behind my parents' backs, and I ran away. I had nothing to lose, no one liked or approached me, and my college prevented me from attending classes. They simply provided me with assignments via email and let me come in for tests. I moved as far away from the town as I could and found an apartment. After working several community jobs to save money, I was able to stabilize myself. At some point, I decided to change my name. I'm not sure why, I just couldn't handle looking at it anymore. This helped me start over. When I re-enrolled in university, I met a few new people, but I had no idea why I was doing it. I was deeply in debt and struggling financially. I somehow completed my teaching degree and relocated to a country on the other side of the planet, where I currently reside. I obtained a great apartment and settled into my new work. Eventually, I met the woman who would become my wife. At first, I couldn't believe her. I flinched any time she attempted to touch me. I fidgeted when she came too close. But she was really patient. Then I went head over heels for her. Eventually, she gave birth to our twin daughters and son. I adore them above all else and would go to any length to keep them safe. Given that I was a foreigner and had not previously been trusted, her family welcomed me fairly quickly. They treated me well, and for the first time in years, I remembered how it felt to be part of a loving family. Now, I live in a lovely home with my wife and children. We're happy. That is, until last night. I was playing PlayStation with my kid while my wife and daughter were in the yard. A knock on the door. My father was standing right there. He offered me a feeble smile and began speaking. But I slammed the door so forcefully that it startled my son. I quickly took him to his room and contacted my wife, requesting that she put our daughter to bed. She was freaking out, as was I. My father kept knocking. I broke down. My wife consoled me, then answered the door. She wanted to know who he was. He stated he was my dad. I had just given my wife a general overview of my past. She had nothing but pain for me, but when she saw him, she became enraged. Understandably so. She screamed at him for abandoning her. After she calmed down, I told her to let him in and stay with the kids while I spoke with him. He explained that he had been assisting my ex clean out her phone. While searching through her texts, he discovered a chat between her and the guy she had cheated with. She apologized for wrecking my life. She said that she wished to take it back. My father didn't address her because he wasn't ready to reopen the wound, but, quietly, he began hunting for me, determined to convince me that he finally believed me. I'm not even sure how he found me. But I don't mind, he's here now. Now I don't know what to do. I've been roaming aimlessly, considering my alternatives. I've come up with 2 options, but I'm not sure which is the proper one. Turn him away. Tell him to return to our nation and leave me alone. Reconcile with him and inform my mother. If there is a better choice, I'd love to learn about it, because I'm utterly clueless right now. I'm stressed out here, and I'm going to take the day off work tomorrow. My father is living at a nearby apartment, so I'll probably go to him with my response. Thank you in advance. Comments Gentius. He claimed he was doing your ex-girlfriend a favor by deleting certain stuff from her phone. Doesn't that seem odd? Why would he continue contact her? Why would he look through her phone? People who are genuinely attempting to help do not break into phones. This is an enormous red flag. The man disowned you, maintains contact with the lady who devastated your life, discovered the truth through snooping, and then tracked you across the globe? Are you truly prepared to invite this instability into your family? T23454, you're correct. Nothing truly adds up. It's a messy issue, and I despise being put in this position. I'm fighting to find the perfect words to speak to him. Random Questioners Master, Advice Giver 26. Oh honey, this was so upsetting to hear. False charges should be prosecuted and imprisoned. They destroy people's lives. This whole situation is completely ludicrous. The best advice I can provide you? Keep him out of your life. He was so quick to dismiss you without even having a proper conversation. And honestly, you're happy even without them. Of course, you can forgive anybody you want, but I couldn't help but question what his true motivation is for attempting to reconcile now. Good luck, and thank you for sharing your story. T23454 OP. Thank you. To be honest, I just want to use the eye for an eye method and keep him away from my family. I'm not a forgiving person, and looking back, he must deal with the repercussions of his actions. Ballistic Pineapple. This is my first time commenting, so I can't say whether this is excellent advice. Honestly, only you can answer this. There is so lot to digest at once, and it has all been thrown upon you. I believe sending your father home would be the best option. It would allow you to decompress and gain a better understanding of what is happening. You can always contact him whenever you feel ready. However, being forced into this circumstance is not ideal right now. You have control over this. This is your life, and you get to pick how it unfolds. Take your time, consider everything, and make a decision when you are genuinely ready. T23454, OP. Yes, in the end, it will be my choice. I've accepted that much. My son asked me a few hours earlier who the man was. I couldn't bring myself to tell him that it was his grandfather. More information. I know it all depends on whether I want them in my life or not. I know I will never have all of my questions addressed. I guess I'm simply trying to make sense of everything, piecing together various responses from different people. Looking back, I'm still not sure why they abandoned me so quickly. Perhaps she fabricated certain texts. But, if that were the case, wouldn't she have reported them to the authorities? I remember them stating there was little to no proof to back up her assertions. None of this adds up. And frankly, I don't want to connect the dots. Sometimes it all seems like a bad dream. Thanks nonetheless, I'll figure it out eventually. Update 1. Hello, everyone, I apologize for not posting recently. I've decided that I will not reconcile with my father. I simply cannot find it within myself to forgive him. For those who wanted the details, here's what happened. The day following my last post, I went to see my father at his hotel. I informed him that I would not be reconciling with him, at all. He had tears in his eyes, but replied he understood. He told me that he had notified my mother about everything and had entirely shut my ex-girlfriend out of the family. Since several of you had asked, I addressed him about why he was still in contact with her in the first place. He stated she felt too sorry to leave us. Honestly, I don't believe that for 1 second. However, it makes little difference at this stage. Apparently, my mother did not take the news well. She asked for my phone number, but my father refused to give it to her. I'm not sure how much of what he said is true. To be honest, I believe most of it is an attempt to entice me back into their lives. But what happened after they threw me out onto the streets like a crazed dog? It makes me sick. My son eventually asked who was at the door. I informed him it was a colleague. When my children are older and we are facing difficult times, I will tell them the truth about my history. Everything is okay right now. This circumstance has shaken me quite a little, but I hope my father keeps his promise and leaves my new life alone. If anything else happens, I will keep you posted. But for now, I consider this to be resolved. Thank you so much for your support and good remarks. And please, if you know someone going through what I did, be there for them. Do not toss them away. Stay by their side. Even if they have to travel across the globe to find serenity. Update 2. I was living quietly till my father discovered me. What about that one event? It sparked off a chain reaction that resulted in this post. Recently, my family betrayed a vow. It made me furious. After much deliberation, I concluded I needed to confront them, directly. I flew back to my native country and met with everyone concerned. My mother. My father. My brother. Even the woman who accused me. I was nervous. What's the strangest part? I realized I no longer saw them as family. I recognized them, of course. But I didn't feel anything for them, as I do for my wife, children, and in-laws. My mother began crying, attempting to apologize. But I felt disgusted. My father soothed her. My brother maintained his coolness and opened the conversation. He asked how I was doing. I replied by ordering him to cease the small talk. This meeting was on my terms. I made it plain that I was not seeking reconciliation. I just needed closure. I warned them that if they tried to chase me, I'd contact the cops. I questioned my parents' decision to forsake me despite the lack of evidence presented by the police. They stated that they made a hasty judgment and that seeing me in detention shattered their hearts. I called them out. They did not strive to protect me. They didn't even try to hear me out before shutting me off entirely. I inquired about a comment made in my initial post. Why was my father even looking through my accuser's phone? He stated she instructed him to remove unnecessary data from her phone. That's when he noticed the conversation logs with her buddies. My father has always been technologically savvy, So while it wasn't a satisfactory response, I accepted it. Then I turned to my brother. "Why did you never try to contact me?" He looked astonished and stated he did, but I ignored him. At first, I did not trust him. Then it turns out he was correct. My brother had attempted hundreds of times to contact me and even sent me money to help me get back on my feet. But I never received his messages. Why? My mother had disabled my contact information from all of our phone contracts. She paid for my brother's previous plan, so he had no idea I had never received a call or message from him. So, when I was at my lowest point, absolutely lost, I was cut off from one of the few people who wanted to help me. Then came the final encounter with my ex. I asked her one question. "Why did you do it?" She stated she was afraid of what would happen. She claimed she never stopped loving me, despite everything. She claimed that each therapy session made her feel even more awful because she knew her charge was false. She even said she hadn't dated anyone since, expecting I would return to her so she could apologize. As if "I'm sorry" could undo everything. But even that was ridiculous. My father had seen chat logs of her with 3 separate partners while I was away. My ex broke down in tears and attempted to touch my hand. She had the audacity to want another opportunity. I was infuriated. I took out my phone and began showing them hundreds of photos. Pictures of my children. Their milestones. Our family travels. This is their first day of school. My wife and I wrapped our arms around them. I looked her in the eyes and said, "This is what you could have had if you hadn't been so stupid." I told my parents, "This is what you missed out on because you refused to hear me out." For a single second, I questioned whether I had gone too far. Then I remembered what they had done to me. I hadn't gotten far enough. The aftermath not. Everything about my experience was unpleasant. I caught up with my former best friend and his family. They were pleased to see me, and I was glad for them. They took me in when everyone else had abandoned me. One day, I hope to travel to my home country and teach my children where half of their culture comes from. But I'll never let them near my so-called family. My only family is my wife, her family and my children. I'd say the visit went fairly well. Edit. About my brother. Several of you inquired about my brother. After some thought, I decided to let him fly over and meet his niece and nephew. I was hesitant at first because we were never particularly close growing up due to brotherly rivalry. I also don't use social media, so he could only have contacted me through my phone number. But by that point, I'd already changed it. He never got an opportunity to contact me. What about my ex? I've left it up to my family to decide whether they want to contact the authorities. If they were truly sorry, they would report her. It's beyond me now. I might hear from my brother about it, but really? I'm just content with the life I've created. Now that my past is entirely behind me, I can finally relax. I proposed to my girlfriend, but my brother was furious as she was his ex. Months later, he suddenly knelt and proposed to her at a family dinner. What would you do if your own brother got down on one knee and proposed to your fiancée, right in front of you and your entire family? Sounds like something straight out of a drama movie, right? But this actually happened to me. And trust me, it only got worse from there. A few months ago, I met Jen. She was everything I had ever wanted: smart, kind, beautiful, and we instantly connected. At first, I kept our relationship private. But as things got serious, I decided it was time to introduce her to my family. One night at a family dinner, I casually showed my parents some pictures of Jen on my phone. My mom gushed about how gorgeous she was. My sisters were excited for me. But then Mark, my older brother, grabbed my phone, and his expression instantly changed. His face turned red with anger. "Are you kidding me? You're dating my ex?" he yelled. I was completely thrown off. Jen had never mentioned dating Mark. Later that night, I asked her about it, and she admitted that they had dated, but only for 1 month. Mark had broken up with her because he was bored and never wanted to settle down. Even though their relationship was brief and meaningless to him, he still demanded that I break up with her immediately. I refused. And from that moment, things were never the same again. Months passed. My love for Jen grew, and I knew she was the one. So, on her birthday, I planned a beautiful dinner with both of our families and closest friends. When I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me, she said yes. The entire room erupted in cheers, except for Mark. I saw the rage burning in his eyes. But before he could ruin the moment, my sisters immediately shut him down. Then, 2 months later, Mark invited the whole family, including Jen and me, to dinner at his apartment. It felt weird. He had been avoiding me since my proposal, so why now? But since my parents and sisters were going, we decided to give it a chance. The dinner started off normal. We ate, we talked, nothing seemed off. Then, Mark suddenly stood up. "I have a big announcement," he said, looking right at Jen. Then, before I could even react, he got down on one knee, pulled out a cheap-looking ring, and proposed to my fiancée. Right in front office me. The room went dead silent. Jen looked horrified. "Mark, get up. What the hell are you doing?" she snapped. Mark ignored her and turned to my parents. "Mom, Dad, don't you think she and I belong together?" My dad jumped up to grab him, but before he could, I punched Mark square in the face. He stumbled back, laughing like a lunatic. "I just wanted to show you that Jen doesn't love you," he sneered. "She's just trying to get back at me." That was it. I grabbed Jen's hand, stormed out, and made a decision right then and there. Mark was not coming to our wedding. A few days later, my mother showed up at my house, furious. "You need to invite Mark to the wedding," she ordered. I laughed in disbelief. "Are you serious? He proposed to my fiancée in front of me. You really think I'd let him anywhere near my wedding?" "He was just joking," she snapped. "You're being dramatic." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then she dropped the bomb. "If Mark isn't invited, then I won't be attending either." I looked her straight in the eye and said, "If that's what you want, go ahead. But I won't beg you to be there." She stormed out, furious. 2 weeks passed. Then my mom showed up again, pretending she wanted to make peace. At first, I thought maybe she had come to apologize. But the moment I brought up Mark's insane proposal, she rolled her eyes. "That was just a joke," she scoffed. "You're overreacting," I snapped. "A joke? You call him humiliating me in front of everyone a joke? You call him trying to steal my fiancée a joke?" Our argument escalated fast. We were yelling at each other when suddenly, Jen got up to leave. And then, my mother attacked her. She lunged at Jen, grabbed her hair, and threw her to the ground. She screamed insults, slapped her, and even tried to scratch her face. I lost it. I dragged my mother off Jen and threw her out of my house. She banged on our door for 10 minutes, screaming and sobbing, before finally leaving. That night, Jen cried herself to sleep in my arms. That was the moment I knew I was done with my mother. I reported the incident to the police. But since Jen didn't want to press charges, they couldn't do much. But my mother wasn't done yet. A few days later, she waited outside my workplace and cornered me. She screamed at me in front of my coworkers, calling me a traitor. "How could you do this to me? You ruined our family." I stared at her, disgusted. "You don't want legal trouble?" I said coldly. "Then you shouldn't have attacked Jen." She begged me to withdraw the police report. I refused. Then she said something that truly made me sick. "Your sisters forgave me. Why can't you?" I stepped closer, looked her right in the eyes, and said, "They can forgive you if they want. But I never will." Then I walked away. And never looked back. Abandoned by my fiancé. After 7 years together, I tried to move on, only to discover that he was dating a younger version of me. Hello everyone, I know it's hard to believe given how nauseatingly terrible I sound right now. But before this happened, I felt really confident and pleased. Almost all of my current friends are shared friends with my ex-fiancé, so I don't want to drag them into this drama or force anyone to take sides or feel uncomfortable. So I think I'm looking to this community for comfort and wisdom because I've read so much mature and grounded advice here. I hope this makes sense, as I'm now confined in a conference room with the shades closed so no one can watch me cry while I type this. I had been with my ex-fiancé for 7 years. He is the only romantic partner I've ever really loved. I was completely in love with him. Even after all of this, I still feel that way about him. He is pleasant, hilarious, friendly, quick-witted, intriguing, ambitious, and beautiful. We were engaged 2 years ago but weren't in a hurry to marry. About a year ago, we began seriously considering having a baby. We had lived blissfully together for 6 years. We'd done all of the traveling and partying we wanted in our 20s, and we were ready to start a family. Over the next 6 months, he was far busier than usual, but I didn't think anything was wrong. I did my best to relieve any additional tension he was suffering, despite the fact that I was myself under extra pressure at work. I took up all of the housekeeping and errands, helped him arrange and pack for vacations, and simply tried to be tolerant when he worked late or had to travel for a week or two. We didn't spend as much time together during that period, and I missed him terribly, but I assumed we were still happy. When the 6 months were up, our schedules returned to normal. I was relieved, until I noticed him becoming increasingly aloof. Despite the fact that we finally had more time together, he began using his phone more frequently and appeared to be more protective of it. I'm not usually jealous, and I entirely trusted him, so I didn't think much of it. Then, after another month had passed, I brought up the possibility of trying for a baby. As we talked about it, I knew something was amiss. He remained quiet for a while. Then he unleashed a flood. He stated that he was unhappy with our relationship and had been for some time. He said he cared dearly for me, but the spark in our relationship had faded. He had tried to convince himself that he could live without that spark, but he had eventually realized that he couldn't. He told me I had done nothing wrong and was, in fact, the ideal partner, but he couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that I wasn't the right one for him. He claimed he didn't want to hurt me, but he couldn't subject himself to a lifetime of settling for someone who wasn't his dream girl, even though he had no idea if his dream lady existed. He apologized, but he couldn't live a lie anymore. I don't think I said anything when he was telling me this since I was so stunned and surprised. I just stood there, watching and listening, crying quietly. When he finished, all I could say was, "Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Do you still love me?" He pondered for a moment before admitting that he still loved me but was no longer in love with me. We spent the entire night talking about his thoughts and our relationship until we were both weary and unable to cry. As the sun rose, he apologized again and suggested that he remain at a friend's apartment. So he packed some things and left. That was roughly 5 months ago. We never truly spoke in person again. His brother and best friend came over that weekend to get the rest of his belongings. I fled while they were packing because I couldn't tolerate being there. I was so surprised, numb, traumatized, and exhausted that I didn't cry much. I couldn't quite understand what was going on while I went through the processes of moving out and explaining the issue to my family. When I eventually got to my new house and sat alone with my boxes, I completely broke down. I couldn't stop crying and dry heaving. I ended up utilizing 5 vacation days to take a week off from work, which irritated my boss. I was unable to get out of bed. I scarcely ate, surviving on an old tub of peanut butter. I searched through all of our previous photos and attempted to figure out where everything went wrong. Then, for 4 months, I did my best to move on. I deactivated all of my social media apps so that I would not have to see him. I dove right into work. I increased my hobbies. I exercised to keep my mind busy. I met with friends and family and pretended everything was fine. I started seeing my therapist again, which helped a little. I finally thought I saw light at the end of the tunnel. Then, about a month ago, I ran into an old college pal. She claimed it was quite upsetting to realize that we weren't together anymore and astonished to see how quickly he'd moved on. I told her I wasn't keeping up with him anymore, but I was doing fine. When I came home, despite knowing it was a bad idea, I reinstalled Instagram and went to his profile. His most recent photo was taken during his cousin's wedding, with his arm around a beautiful female. All of the old photos of him and me were removed from his profile. Again, I realized it was a bad, self-destructive notion, but I looked up the girl's profile and Googled her. She is actually a younger, smarter, prettier, and better version of me. We attended the same university, but she graduated from a prominent program that I was not accepted into. We both have green eyes and brown hair, but she is significantly more attractive and like a model. We're both slender and fit, but she has a stunning hourglass body. She appears far more stylish than I do and has tens of thousands of followers, despite the fact that she is not an influencer. In reality, we work for the same company. I'm pretty sure my ex met her at work, but she got a job in a prestigious division right out of college and probably makes more money than I do. She is a better version of me, 7 years younger. And the love of my life is dating her. For the past month, I've been spiraling. I can't quit thinking about my ex-fiancée and this girl. I peek at her Instagram every day and torture myself with her stunning photos. She's shared a dozen photos of my ex in the last few months, and he looks so happy, healthy, and fit. They've been on excursions together. He has brought her to his hometown. He's even shared a picture of them with a sappy remark, which he never did when we were together. I have no evidence, and I doubt my ex would do this, but I now believe he was at least interested in her while we were still together. She joined the organization around a year ago. I'm so worried about running into them. I understand that my behavior is compulsive and masochistic. I've uninstalled Instagram and promised myself I'd never do it again, only to wake up the next day, reinstall the app, and repeat the process. My therapist has been trying to help, but I can't get over this. I'm locked in a mental loop of self-loathing and self-pity, a bizarre combination of tremendous melancholy and latent wrath. I feel very depressed, useless, used up, rejected, and suddenly very old. I understand that comparison is the thief of joy. I know I'm still young enough to move on. I understand that social media is a highlight reel, and their relationship may not be ideal. I know this girl hasn't done anything wrong to me. I understand that my ex deserves to find his perfect girl. But none of this takes away from the reality that I expected to be pregnant with the love of my life by this time of year. Instead, I am alone, and he has found someone better. If you've had a similar experience, please offer your advice or sympathize with me. I do not know. I feel so worthless and alone. Update. Hello again, guys. It's been 3 months since I wrote about my inability to move on from my 7-year relationship with my ex-fiancé. While I wince at the thought of how terrible I was when I wrote that post, crying alone in that conference room, I was astounded by the sensitive, mature, and useful advice I received from users of this subreddit. These last few months have been an absolute roller coaster, and I felt I owed this subreddit an update after how much comfort and counsel you all provided me during some of my worst days. I don't think things would have turned out quite as well if I had continued to bottle up my repressed emotions and isolate myself. So I'm grateful to everyone who left comments and messaged me. Thank you very much. So this is what occurred. As several of you suggested, I blocked my ex-fiancé and his girlfriend on Instagram the same night I wrote that post. I believe that verbalizing how obsessive and masochistic my behavior was, rather than keeping it all inside, and finally feeling validated in my emotional reactions after reading your supportive comments, rather than feeling alone and crazy, triggered something in my brain. I vowed to break out of that self-destructive cycle, to stop tormenting myself with their gorgeous photographs, and to restore some sense of self-worth. It was a huge relief not to be constantly drawn to their new photos. Instead, I gave myself some time to recover rather than scratching at the scab every day. That weekend, I resolved to reconnect with my family and friends and stop acting that I was handling the breakup perfectly. They were tremendously compassionate, but also surprised that I had been able to conceal my terrible emotions so well. It seemed like I had instantaneously rebuilt my support network. I had no idea how emotionally isolated I'd gotten until I was able to be honest and open with the people in my life. I continued to avoid talking to friends who were shared friends with my ex because I didn't want to put anyone in an embarrassing situation. But I was able to reconnect with a couple of my other friends, and I took the initiative to finally organize some fun activities. Getting out of the house to enjoy breakfasts, hikes, and shows with my friends in recent months has been really beneficial to my mental health. Even though I am an introvert, simply being in various surroundings and focusing on people other than my ex was beneficial. I also chose to try another therapist based on your ideas. My initial therapist was fairly helpful, but considering that he was in his late 50s, I felt he couldn't relate to some of the complexities in my concerns. So there was a bit of a generational difference. My new therapist is extremely compatible with me and immediately comprehended the complexities of my issues. She has been quite helpful in addressing the underlying causes of my concerns, and she has been able to validate and examine my emotions in a much more intimate manner. If you're having trouble finding a therapist who is a good fit for you, I strongly advise you to look around. Therapy is definitely not one size fits all. Another frequent suggestion from you was to locate another employment away from my ex-fiancé and his girlfriend. I didn't think it was possible because the job market in my field isn't fantastic right now. However, I began aggressively looking for other opportunities. I updated my resume, filled out a few applications, and, surprisingly, got an interview. Then, unexpectedly, someone in my division above me left to work for a competitor. The senior managers wanted to fill his position fast, so they went with an internal hire. After 5 or 6 rounds of interviews, God, I loathe them, I was hired. I am quite pleased for this promotion. Not only is the salary significantly higher, but the hours are more consistent as well. It's crazy, I feel like my life's momentum has flipped so suddenly. And I finally got an office. It's small, but I truly like it. The only drawback was that this promotion required me to remain working in the same building, albeit a very large one, as my ex. I ran into my ex as I was leaving work before Christmas, which was something I had been dreading. We exchanged some niceties, and he admired my new haircut. I thanked him, wished him well, and said that I needed to hurry to catch the next train. I wish I could say I was calm and collected, but I was so scared to meet him again after 6 months that I practically shook. On the way home, I relaxed and realized, hey, that wasn't so bad. He looked good, but I didn't get any feelings of grief or yearning. I largely felt uneasy, as if we had become strangers again. I didn't feel the customary want to stalk his Instagram and was really relieved to discover that he was doing well, especially because I'd cared for him for so many years. I felt like I was finally moving forward. The next morning, I awoke to a dozen messages from my ex-fiancé. They started at roughly 2 a.m. These were slightly nonsensical in times, so I'm guessing he was a little inebriated when he sent them. They were all long walls of text, which shocked me because he doesn't usually express his feelings verbally. He wrote that he couldn't stop thinking about me when we met outside the workplace. He expressed sadness that we were no longer friends because I still felt like his best buddy. And he lamented how things turned out. He said he wondered if he'd made a major mistake in a moment of weakness and upended his entire life, and that seeing me made him regret it all. He apparently saw that I had blocked him on Instagram, which I thought was humorous given how much I had been following his account, and he stated it made him really upset. I concluded from his texts that he had most likely broken up with the woman I had seen on his Instagram. He stated that he thought he had been hunting for a perfect lady who does not exist, and that he wanted to reignite our spark after failing to find it with others. I won't lie, reading his text was shocking. I was trembling and having trouble processing a lot of things at first. Part of me wished, impulsively, to give him another chance. But after pondering his words for a day, I concluded that he was less sorry for losing our relationship and more regretful that the better pastures he wanted were not as green as he had hoped. I tried to react sweetly but firmly, noting that while I valued and respected our friendship, I no longer trusted him to the same extent that I once did. I told him that I believed it would be complicated and painful for us to become friends in the near future. I stated how hurt I was when he surprised me after assuring that everything was well, and how I had battled for a long time to figure out what was missing in our relationship. But, ultimately, I felt that if he thought the missing piece was so important that he wanted to leave after all those years together, we probably weren't meant to be. I wished him the best. He did not reply to my mails. I was disturbed by the whole affair, but I went on to enjoy my holiday break with my family, even attending my friend's New Year's Eve party, which I had considered skipping. Well, I'm so pleased I didn't skip the party since I met a fantastic man there. He's hilarious, clever, cute, engaging, empathetic, and anxious to settle down and have children, despite having recently ended a long-term relationship. We've been on 3 dates so far, and at the risk of sounding overly exuberant, they've been the best of my life. We want to take it slowly because we were both in long-term relationships only a year ago, but we've been surprised by how similar our personalities, hobbies, and aspirations are. Frankly, we both want to start a family as soon as feasible. So, while I try not to be overconfident in our relationship, I am also very excited to see where it goes. To summarize, thanks in large part to the counsel I received 3 months ago on this subreddit, I've emerged from a very dark place and am now cautiously excited about my future, for the first time in a long time.